Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I think we're going to start. We're at 3 minutes after 2 o'clock, so I want to make sure we get things started on time so we can all enjoy a nice happy hour afterwards. So my name is Jackie Higgins. I'm the stewardship chair this year for ASLA San Diego, and I just wanted to thank you all for being here today. There's been a lot of publicity lately about the drought and water restrictions, and we feel very strongly as landscape architects about our resource of trees that we have, especially in our urban environment. So that's kind of how the topic for this fall's event came up in our discussions within the committee. So we have, first of all, I guess I just want to also thank the sponsors of this event. Without our sponsors, we wouldn't be able to have such a beautiful venue, and I love the hors d'oeuvres afterwards. So thank you so much to Gale Materials and Tri-C. And they'll be outside afterwards during the happy hour, so you can chat with them. I also wanted to thank our Four Seasons sponsors that come back and sponsor the San Diego chapter of ASLA every year. Again, without our sponsors, we wouldn't be able to put on these wonderful events and be able to create awareness within the community about what we're doing and some of the better practices that we're discovering as we go along. So our Four Seasons sponsors are Modern Building Supply, Thompson's Building Materials, TB Pennick, Hydroscape, and Repro House. So thank you to those sponsors as well. So we have an incredible lineup today. I'm very honored and pleased with all the speakers that are going to be talking with us today. As you can see from the agenda that's up on the screen, we will have a half hour for questions and answers at the end of all the presentations. So feel free to either keep your questions until then if it's a longer question, but if it's something short, you can also ask the presenter at the end of their presentation. So Bob Perry is going to be our first presenter this afternoon, and Bob's going to talk to us a little bit about his research on carbon sequestration and how it affects our urban trees and our urban environment. And then Bob's going to hand it off to Abigail Schrader, who's representing CAL FIRE today, and she's going to discuss the work that CAL FIRE has been doing to monitor the urban forests. So that's going to be awesome. And then Abigail will hand it over to Robin Reve. And Robin is going to discuss a lot of topics with us today. And she's brought along some props, so there's going to be a little show and tell as well, which is always fun. And Robin's going to talk about tree selection as well as tree quality and nursery quality and things to look for when you're selecting plants. And then finally, last but not least, is Bill. Bill's back there right now. And Bill's going to talk to us about our local drought issues and how our local trees are being affected by the drought and things to keep in mind when we're adjusting for these water restrictions and turf removals. So, and then Bill will wrap it up for us. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Bob. Welcome, Bob Perry.
Oh, a clicker, yeah.
So Michelle's going to run the video real quick.
Okay, sure.
So before Bob talks, I just wanted to point out this great resource for you guys. Running. So I don't know if you guys are aware, this was released by NASA last November. And what NASA is doing is they're monitoring the way that trees benefit the global environment and the contribution that they make towards reducing kind of greenhouse gases and the things that we want to get out of the atmosphere to prevent global warming. So I apologize that the audio on this is not hooked up because we didn't think that through. But you can see as the trees, we're coming out of the season where the trees aren't actively growing. You have a lot of the red up in the top upper northern hemisphere. And then as you go into spring, you can see the time of year down here, you start seeing the plant growth of trees and shrubs starting to reduce those gases that affect our global warming. So they're going to be tracking, NASA's going to be tracking this every year. They've modeled 2006 because that was the first year that they really identified global warming being the trend. So this is almost the benchmark of what we started with. And then they'll be monitoring and modeling this every year and making that information available. So a great resource. We'll post a link on the stewardship website so you can link directly to it. But it is available on YouTube and on the NASA Goddard Space Center website.
It's about a 3-minute video it's very interesting.
So you can see now we're in summer when you have the plant growth, and you can see how much a lot of the greenhouse gases have been reduced in the northern hemisphere. And you start seeing the purple down here, and this is where burning is happening in the southern hemisphere in Africa and South America, and different types of gases from those clearing of forests. And they walk you through in the video what exactly carbon monoxide and the different gases. So a great resource I just wanted to make you aware of.
Thanks, Michelle. Sorry I jumped the gun there.
Well, good afternoon and welcome. I want to first thank Jackie and Michelle and John and others who put time in from the ASLA effort to have this event occur here, and as well acknowledge the sponsors who support these occasions. I feel very honored to be here to share ideas and information that I think has relevance to our industry and profession, and in that way this gives me a chance to show and tell things that I've been involved in for a number of years now. And in our conversations and program planning, we were trying to look at some of the specific benefits of our urban landscapes, trees in particular, as a way of reinforcing things that we're trying to do and perhaps identifying things that we need to manage more carefully. So what I'm going to be presenting to you are a series of images and observations that reduce down to what I call a carbon footprint assessment of our urban landscapes. And in that regard, have some metrics to share with you and hope it's informative on a technical level on one hand, to just conceptually suggesting actions and directions we might pursue on another hand, and all along the way encourage us all to become more informed and knowledgeable about a lot of different things. So in this regard, the emphasis is the environmental benefits of plants, and we'll define that in a moment. So we often look at this new definition of sustainability, or challenge of sustainability being defined as a social, economic, environmental, cultural phenomena, and a balancing of all of these considerations. And this is focused on the environmental component of that conversation, and one that I feel is, hugely important, based on the assumption that if you can't sustain your environment, which indeed is what's the basis of our existence here, some of these other challenges are secondary to just resolving the sustainability issue in the environmental sense. So with that, we'll start with this image here and say that I'm going to divide the benefits of our urban landscapes and urban forests into two categories, primary and secondary, and want to point out that from the environmental perspective, the fundamental life-sustaining role of plants on this planet is an energy conversion process through photosynthesis that reduces down to the sequestering of carbon, the embodiment of energy, and the release of oxygen into the atmosphere. And this is what makes the world turn round and life on this planet survive. And so these are the primary areas of measurement and evaluation that plants can provide to us in our urban landscapes. Many secondary benefits exist too. And in this regard, they're very significant and important, and depending upon project situations, the priorities change. But we can certainly attest to the performance of our urban landscapes in terms of climate mitigation, pollution mitigation, and extending into some more challenging areas of understanding that plants affect our emotional and mental health. And there's no doubt that we can't imagine an urban environment without plants. It helps complete the urban fabric in critical ways. But in that regard, I would remind us that urban landscapes are a cultural invention. So they are evolved through the thoughts and ideas and actions of people more than some of the natural processes that affect the evolution, adaptation, and functioning of plants in natural systems. So we're talking about people making decisions here and understanding what we're trying to accomplish, and we pursue those choices based on certain priorities. Did I hit the black one? Okay. Now let me go back one. Okay, so thank you. There are too many buttons here. It's like my remote at home. So in this regard, what's interesting, and I'm talking on a global scale now and a universal scale, and I brought a couple of props here. So very simple props, but I think they do demonstrate pretty clearly what this chart attempts to summarize with some numbers. But I brought along a wonderful piece of oak wood that's been carved into a bookend. So this is one of two bookends that I have in my library, and it weighs approximately 1 pound. And the universal point to make here is for every pound of dry weight biomass that plants produce on this planet, they accomplish the same environmental benefits. One of those is half of this by weight is sequestered carbon. The other half is oxygen. And I'm always mystified and marveled by saying I'm holding up pure carbon, oxygen, and a little bit of hydrogen thrown in for a good mixture. And to me it looks like wood, not those three basic elements on this planet. And to drive home the point about the carbon sequestration, I brought along some of Kingsford's finest briquettes, half-pound worth of carbon right here, illustrating, to I think what we commonly associate carbon to be, a dark, heavy, dense compound. And indeed, sequestered like this and cleaned and formed, we do have a half a pound of pure carbon in these briquettes that I'm holding up. So whether you're an oak tree, coast redwood tree, a wonderful heritage rose plant, for every pound of plant tissue that is produced by plants in our environment, we have this universal half-pound carbon ratio relationship that's been sequestered from the atmosphere. Another universal benefit of plants, every pound of biomass that's produced releases in the process of photosynthesis 1 pound of oxygen to enrich the atmosphere. So it's reducing what we would call the greenhouse gas load of carbon dioxide, storing the carbon, releasing the oxygen. Perhaps more interesting to me and part of the carbon footprint modeling is to say there's embodied energy here. It was once sunlight, it was once water, it's once carbon dioxide, and now it's plant tissue, and it has potential energy in here through the bonds of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. 1 pound of dry weight biomass contains enough food energy for one person for 1 day. It contains enough energy to produce 2.25 kilowatt hours of electricity or 1,655 BTUs of heat energy. It just means that we can describe the energy value of 1 pound of biomass produced by any type of plant anywhere on this planet to that universal potential. And if I was able to eat this, I would get my 1 day of energy. And in order to really get the benefit of the food energy that's in here, I need to inhale that 1 pound of oxygen, go through respiration, use that 1 pound of oxygen, consume the energy value in this, and release that ½ pound of carbon back into the atmosphere through respiration and breathing. And so it's a wonderful little cycle, and it's a very universal core, I feel, of understanding environmental benefits of plants. So in this regard here, we have just a picture of downtown Los Angeles, and here we have plants that are planted for a variety of reasons, but just understand whether you ask plants to do it or not, they're producing these benefits, they're performing these functions, and contribute these basic life-sustaining benefits to life on this planet. So I want to now segue back to the secondary benefits, knowing that we use plants for a lot of purposes, and we use them for very functional and environmental reasons, such as climate mitigation, to reduce heat load on buildings during summer months and potentially allow sunlight access during the winter. That reduces the cooling cost that is sustained by use of electricity that's often produced by the burning of fossil fuels to produce the electricity to run the air conditioner. We have a variety of benefits to help filter out pollution that we generate in our urban environments, both in the air and in water, as well as stabilize our soils and reduce erosion, factors like that. And we go into the realm of the emotional, psychological impact of plants, and happily there's some wonderful literature that really delves into this challenging area to describe different ways that we respond to plants and the benefits they afford us in our lives. And so we have that checklist that can be illustrated with images like this. Not only does climate mitigation provide functional relief to our climate conditions, but there's aesthetics and beauty along with it, as you can see with these Colereteria trees adjacent to these single-story homes in the city of Laverne. Clearly, we impact the shape of our topography, introduce homes and buildings in many places, and we have a long list of functional roles of plants to stabilize and control and to eventually heal over some of those initial grading actions. There's no doubt about many of our cities are wonderfully dynamic and filled with a lot of energy and noise and other factors that the landscape, particularly parks, provide relief to and a sanctuary to just find your own place and space and to enjoy your daily activities. In this case here, looking at this park example that was designed by Mia Lair and Associates, Vista Hermosa, first park in the city of Los Angeles in 100 years, and a very skillful combination of accommodating recreation, habitat, and applying many of the concepts to reduce the consumption of water, pursue species diversity, and have a profile of a new framework for the design of urban parks. So I'm going to stop going down the secondary benefit line of discussion and come back to the primary and say we can now do some pretty sensible projections and assessments of our landscape decisions and choices. And so I'm going to look at two different types of landscape, describe their benefits to us, and then look at the costs associated with producing and maintaining them. So in this regard here, I'm just going to focus on turf grass and say that our tall fescue, cool season grass, it's pretty tough and well adapted to many areas of California. We can pretty accurately describe that there's about a half a pound of plant tissue or dry weight biomass per square foot. The foliage that's not trimmed, the stems, and the roots. And there's a certain amount of that organic material that is deposited in the soil, so it has additional benefit in terms of carbon sequestration. You take that half pound per square foot, and you discover then that 21,780 pounds of carbon are held in that 1 acre of turf grass. And equally here, it weighs 21,780 pounds. 10,890 pounds is carbon. There's been 21,000 pounds of oxygen released. And if we're to convert that turf grass into kilowatt energy units, it would be equal to 9,680 kilowatt hours of energy. So this is the primary benefit profile. And you do a landscape project, you say, well, how many square feet of turf grass do I have? Multiply it by these universal values, and you can come up with the environmental contributions from turf grass to the environment. Similarly, we take our trees and shrubs, and we can do projected estimates as to their environmental benefits. This allows me to point to the little icon up in the upper right-hand corner, and the iTrees carbon footprint calculator tool that has recently come into our profession, and say a wonderful step forward. And so I've taken values using that calculator to say, well, how much carbon is in a 10-inch diameter, breast height, coast live oak tree? And we do know that some trees have greater density of wood or other characteristics that can affect the calculation, which has been factored in. But for this particular tree, 10-inch caliper diameter breast height, iTree says, hey, 980 to 1,000 pounds of dry weight biomass, canopy, stems, and roots. And so we have now the beginnings of an industry standard and framework to apply to some of our projects. And in that, we can take that weight and convert it into the stored carbon, the potential energy value it represents, and the oxygen benefit to the landscape. And that's just for that one tree. We now take this tree 50, 60 years later when it's mature and it's in an urban context, and we say it's now gone from 10 inches to 48 inches. It now weighs 34,000 pounds. And we can see the lifetime or the life cycle benefit of this plant going from rather youthful to more mature. And it's really very impressive. So with that, we'll take a landscape that's in the Arroyo Seco area around the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. There are golf courses and turf and tree park landscapes such as this image is illustrating here. And we want to know if indeed these benefits really add up and we're gaining all of this from our landscape plants. And this is where we say we have to start looking at the investment of materials and resources and actions to achieve these landscapes, from grading the ground, trenching for pipes, manufacturing the piping and putting it in, to the pumping of water, to the mowing, the trimming, the fertilizing, and see what's really going on here. And in this particular case, what we've done here is we said, let's bring to Southern California from the State Water Project 1 acre foot of water, 12 inches. And we'll also get it from reclaimed sources from our local wastewater treatment plants. Sometimes the water goes from here to here, and the cost is more than what you might first think. Groundwater is by far the cheapest, just pumping it from a local source, and desalinization is the worst. It has more energy associated with cleaning the water and removing the salts. So we bring our 1 acre foot of water from Northern California, and we need to take 1.3 of these trees and combust it and generate the energy to pump that water to Southern California. Reclaimed water, happily, we only use, when we pump water out of the ground, about 1/2 the tree. So we can cut this tree off about here and save the rest, and the top, though, has to be used for the energy that we're using. That's reclaimed young groundwater. 1 acre feet, we can actually pump out 4 acre feet of water before we have to cut this tree down and convert it into its energy for obtaining that water. And if we're using desalinized water, we need 2 trees per acre foot. So now I've just switched into energy as a way of trying to demonstrate the relationship, but it's the same thing with carbon. We're just talking about 1 acre foot of water from Northern California. The energy that's consumed releases 670 pounds of carbon into the atmosphere on average. And so this is the carbon footprint methodology here. You go to UC Davis, you go to their Sustainable Sites website, you read about best care practices for turf grass, and they come up with, at a minimum, you should be applying 1 pound of pure nitrogen on each application to your 1 acre of turf grass 4 times a year. And that's to keep it healthy, keep it functional, and these things. And when you convert the energy, the embodied energy, into carbon footprint of 1 pound of nitrogen times how many pounds you would apply per acre, 195, that's equal to 390 pounds of biomass, or approximately 8/10 of one of those oak trees there. So just trying to have a metric here to see, well, what are we really achieving and what's the cost along the way to produce that. PVC pipe and high-density polyethylene pipe is also very revealing. 1 acre PVC pipe, the embodied energy and associated carbon footprint is equal to over 7 of these trees. And to a lot of us may not realize that high-density polyethylene is more energy intensive, has a bigger carbon footprint than PVC pipe. And so it's equal to at least 8 trees and the embodied energy and sequestered carbon that those 10-inch diameter breast height oak trees sequester. So the picture I'm painting here is one that begins to show us that things that seem to be relatively affordable or convenient or common in our industry need to be reassessed from another perspective as part of our efforts to achieve the best benefits from our urban landscapes. So take it one more step and talk about fossil fuel use, diesel and gasoline, and have a way of translating that into a carbon footprint comparison as well. Now, the point I will be making here is I'm looking at water, I'm looking at fertilizer, I'm looking at the piping, and I'm looking at the gasoline use. I'm not looking at manufacturing brick, concrete, steel, lights. We're just looking at sort of what sustains plants and looking at plants to inputs for plants. And as soon as you expand the conversation into those other landscape materials, you will find that we're not anywhere close to a sustainable picture in that regard. And even in this regard, we're challenged, as these examples will show you. But a quick departure of this to show you a project we've worked on in Moreno Valley. Very modest. It's not going to win any awards, but I hope it's on the front end of something we do increasingly in our profession. We took this 1 acre, we ran it through the state water efficient landscape ordinance. We actually incorporated the very recently adopted 0.45 adjustment factor down from 0.7. And in this approach, the state would approve a design that required or did not exceed 770,000 gallons of water per year. And in Moreno Valley, we bring that water from the State Water Project. We apply 2.4 acre feet a year of water, so we're applying about 30 inches of water to this median per year. And we're going to grow a landscape that we have used the trees to calculate its lifetime benefits. We also put in some amendments. We also grow our plants in nurseries and truck them out, and we dig our holes. This project we did by augering holes, pre-hydrating, filling the holes up 2 or 3 times, and we said no irrigation system. It's going to have to survive on rainfall alone within the watershed, if you will, of a 16-foot wide median. And there's no additional surface area to subsidize the irrigation or moisture into this median. And we've planted our plants, and the project's in its second year. We've had a 95% success ratio, which we're very, very happy with. We also know that part of what's buying us time is by augering a good-sized hole, filling it up with water and hydrating the soil and calculating how much water is available to plants. These are small plants, and there's relatively good soil moisture availability for many months. And it's the small plants, the small leaf surface area that is in proportion to the available moisture. And we know that when we planted in May, there was enough ground moisture available for these plants to carry them all the way through a very hot summer. This environment has 63 inches of evapotranspiration stress based on the weather stations. And so it does take off very well, but beware, as these plants get larger, their leaf surface area multiplies exponentially. Their capacity to use water increases remarkably. 97–98% of water use by plant is transpired for cooling of leaves and lost to the atmosphere. And so that's a pretty universal constant. And so at the moment, we have this wonderful large soil area relative to small leaf surface area. And when we get our rains, 4 to 5 inches a year, we get some additional moisture and the plants are happy. The question is, what happens after 15 years, or will the water create a ceiling, which it will, on the ultimate size of these plants? In any event, we did our little calculation. We said, we're going to grow a forest that has this much carbon sequestration potential. If we had used state water to achieve that, and we look at the carbon footprint of pumping that water down, in 9.25 years, the water that we would pump down from Northern California, its carbon footprint would exceed the lifetime benefit of our landscape. And it raises a question. Are we looking for parity? Are we looking for 10 years of positive benefit here, 30 years, 40 years? This line of assessment of landscapes starts to add to our toolkit of ideas and strategies to think about what we're doing and make choices here. We're very glad we didn't put in the drip irrigation, 18 inches on center, 8 lines in this 16-foot wide median, because we would have released per acre, in this case, 2,000 pounds of carbon. So it would have offset the benefit of many of our trees just in using that material alone. And to take that idea once more and just try to impress you with things that we need to study more carefully and to account for and introduce into these equations and assessments, working on a project in Moore Park where decades ago they planted coast redwood trees by the hundreds, creating a wonderful urban boulevard that is just the heart and soul of that city. And voila, 4 years of drought, reducing irrigation, and simply overplanting and using a species that's not adapted to the climate of this region, we have a whole forest of trees in full decline. And it's as much from good intention to plant lots of trees to create a lot of carbon sequestration and just not understand that we run to a climax in our urban landscapes, and we now are faced with not only the economic costs, but the very likely reality that these trees will be removed and hopefully used and recycled in some meaningful way, but we've lost their benefit after this stage of their development here. The energy we use on the equipment that's dedicated for landscapes is huge, to just an example of the grading and shaping of the land, which is so important, particularly for rainwater harvesting and impoundment of moisture that we get through rain. But we use huge amounts of fossil fuel to operate the equipment to achieve, in this case, a channel that's going to be replanted and used for restoration purposes. And we're working on this project, and we know already that the energy we use to prep the site is going to exceed the lifetime benefit of the natural habitat we're going to install there, even though it has the secondary benefits of wildlife habitat, of open space, of filtering air pollution and things like this. The carbon footprint equation says you lost the battle already. You've spent so much carbon just to prep the site to get it ready for planting that you'll never catch up with your investment. And want to continue just to convey that what seems to be standard practice and something that we pencil out in economic terms as a challenge to care for all of our urban landscapes, the relentless armada of cars and trucks that go on the road every day to visit landscapes of all different sizes, different times of the year, different periods over the years to perform different maintenance actions, adds significantly to the carbon footprint that is charged against the benefits of our urban plants. And in this particular case, on another project we're involved in, damage was done to a mature eucalyptus tree, and the decision was made that it goes out. I'm impressed that you can take a 50-foot tree like this and in less than 15 minutes time cut it apart, lie it on the ground, and put it in chippers and shredders that can take 12 and 14-inch diameter stems and just chip it down in a heartbeat. You know, that part's miraculous. The other part is this can become potentially recycled into compost and be distributed and used as a mulching material on top of our landscape. And so we do get some additional benefit. There's still carbon embodied in that tissue that's in that compost. Beware, as it does digest and get composted down to its mineralized form, the carbon is returned back to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. So the cycle is delayed, but the inevitable ending is the same, that this tree no longer provides the shade, the habitat value, its sequestered carbon is now lost in terms of its benefit. So in summary, and I haven't seen anybody wave the hands that I've gone beyond 30 minutes, but I probably have in my excitement over this. Want to say I do see we're in an industry and a profession to really achieve cultural landscapes that have as many benefits as possible. Bottom line, in the environmental point of view, is to say, do not consume more energy, more carbon, more oxygen than the landscape produces or embodies. And we now have tools to project what our landscapes produce and embody. And so we can begin to factor that into our design and planning process. And we know right away, stay away from desalinated water, stay away from the State Water Project. grade your projects really well and capture that rain and infiltrate it. Work with appropriate plants, and I'm getting ahead of myself to where I have a checklist of advice that I feel these observations lead to. We do want an abundant and diverse landscape, and I know Robin's going to really add to that diversity discussion in a few minutes. And yet say it doesn't mean that we have to skimp and run from the challenge. These are tools and ideas to help us meet that challenge and pursue it with higher levels of success and effectiveness for all of us. Fit the region, fit the microclimates. Microclimates let so many species of plants grow in Southern California, and I celebrate that. And if you do fit plants correctly to both the region and the microclimate, you have wonderful ways of enabling them to perform to remarkable capabilities. Right plant, right place is not overcrowding, not oversize. Do this carbon footprint tool approach. Manage your water use. Plant for climate mitigation, pollution, and these many other benefits here. And ultimately, let's invite the public and all of us to urban landscapes that are indeed filled with bountiful opportunity to find recreation, find habitat, find personal stress relief, and find the joys and excitement of living in a culture that really enjoys landscaping. Thank you very much. So I don't know if there are any short questions. Otherwise, I would be introducing Abigail, have her come up and continue the presentation. And as Jackie mentioned, we'll have a half hour afterwards for questions. Any quick, short questions? Great. Abigail. Watch out for the black button. It turns things off.
Okay, my name's Abigail Schrader. I'm the urban forester for the Inland Empire area. I know this is San Diego, but Lynette Short is usually your urban forester for this area. She is taking her RPF exam today, which is a big deal. We hope that she passes. She will pass. So I'm here today filling in for her and for our program manager, John Melvin. So let's get started. Basically, I'm going to talk about our program within CAL FIRE and our grant program. Our program is based off of the Urban Forestry Act of 1978. The purpose of this act is to arrest the decline of the urban forest. And through that, facilitate tree planting, improve management of urban forest, and improve the quality of life. We strive to facilitate the tree maintenance and job opportunities, maximize tree and vegetation cover to conserve energy, produce fuels and other projects or products. Also to encourage the coordination between state and local government agencies, and in that encourage citizen participation through nonprofits or other things. Our mission and vision is that the California's urban and community forests will be healthy and well managed and provide as many benefits to Californians as possible. This, I don't know if you can see it very well, but it's just basically the breakdown of our program and our managers, our urban forestry field staff. The Bay Area is Jimmy Scheid. Northern California is Glenn Flamick. And Guy Anderson, he is in one of our new urban foresters. He is for the Fresno area. And then David Haas, we just hired a new urban forester. He comes from Caltrans. He will be taking over the LA area. As I said, Lynette has some of Orange County and San Diego and Imperial areas. And my area is all that right there. And I'm very thankful to have our new urban forester, David Haas, because my area was all that area and LA, which has about 178 cities. So very thankful for David. What we do, we have grant programs, which is, it kind of takes up most of our time when we have the money. And then we oversee the California Urban Forest Councils and the regional councils. We also oversee Tree City USA programs that the Arbor Day Foundation puts on. And we help coordination between governments and urban forestry organizations. I know Lynette has been helping a nonprofit get started in the San Diego area, for example. Our program goals are to optimize the benefits that people receive from urban and community forestry, and to improve the management and health of the urban forestry, or urban and community forestry, to promote industry and growth and job creation. Our desired outcome is to increase the investment in urban forestry efforts from the state and regional local governments, and to increase resolutions, policies, and management of urban forestry. Our funding sources in the past have been, we had, I think our first grants were Proposition 12. We had a couple of years of Proposition 40. We finished off the Proposition 84 last year. And we do get federal funding also. Currently, we just released, we signed the grant contracts for our 2014-2015 grant year. And we had 17 million statewide. This was from the GHG Reduction Fund. We were expecting to, a couple of weeks ago, to get our new funds for this 2015-2016 year, and it's been pushed back till January. So we're hoping that that still goes through. But everybody still has a little bit of time to get their ideas on their projects. This, I don't think the link works, but what I wanted to show with this was basically the grants that were funded, that were available to San Diego area. And because of some of our limitations that we had on our funding this year, most of the grant funds had to go to, actually all of our grant funds had to go to disadvantaged communities. So San Diego got 2 grants. The Tree San Diego, which will be a project in Chula Vista, got $750,000. And the City of San Diego got a management plan grant, an urban forestry management plan grant, which is a total of $750,000. We have two statewide grants through California Urban Forest Council and California Relief that San Diego still could have a possibility of getting. Our grant program specifically, we have the Green Trees for the Golden State, which is pretty much our tree planting grant. And that ranges in between $150,000 to $750,000. With our funds for next year, we're expecting to have double of what we had last year. So these ranges could also change with next year's funding. We also have urban forestry management for GHG reduction. That can be an urban forestry management plan or inventory or tacked on with an inventory. All of these categories have to have some kind of tree planting component with them. The green innovations projects are just good ideas with urban greening. We have urban wood biomass utilization, and the last is woods in the neighborhood, which is basically buying blighted land and reclaiming it as a park or good urban and community forestry areas. No, it's 200,000 to 1.5 million. Yeah. Our urban forests provide numerous environmental benefits, as was discussed in the last talk. We are looking, the urban forest help to reduce runoff, and with our last couple rainstorms that we've seen, I don't know if San Diego gets all the LA news, but that's pretty much all we get. You see all the water going down LA River into the ocean. Filters of the air pollutants, including ozone and particulates, reducing CO2 by sequestration, and lowering and cooling and heating needs for houses and businesses, providing habitat for birds and animals and insects, mitigating heat island effects by providing shade and reducing noise, and also acting as a windbreak. Economic impacts of urban forests. This is data from 2009, so it could be different numbers by now. Supported 59,000 jobs, which resulted in 3.2 billion. Basically, just demonstrating the economic impacts that urban forestry provides. This, I don't know if you've seen this, it was put out by the California Urban Forest Council and helped by Invest from the Ground Up. It's just a good demonstration of how trees can help businesses. There's, right here it says how 20% businesses that are lined with tree streets show higher, 25% or 20% are higher income streams. Trees are attracting more valuable and loyal customers. Just a lot of good benefits that trees do to businesses. And this is available on our website if anybody is interested in it. The website's right there. I'll share it again at the end, so you can write it down if you're interested. And the benefits of trees to residential areas. Just simply by having trees on your street can increase your property value by $8,000. All the benefits that trees bring residential areas, of course, the cooling and heating, and saving money on your energy bills, improving mental health and physical health, and the references are also linked at the bottom if you're interested. This is outdated data, so I don't know how accurate it is for here. And I'll skip to the end. Again, these are Lynette's and my contact information. If you had any more questions, feel free to contact us. I am better with email. I will get right back to you with email. And then, I don't know, can you click on the link at the bottom? and I'll show some of the resources that we have available on our, does it? Okay. With, on our website, if you Google CAL FIRE Urban Forestry, it'll bring you up right to our link. Click on the link, and then at the bottom of our page, we have numerous resources. The Invest from the Ground Up, the two brochures that you saw there. Also, we have some good water-wise tree care for the drought right now. And that's been approved by Save Our Water Foundation and a couple other things. So there's that on there. There's also our best management policies for our grants, how to choose nursery stock, that type of thing. And it's all stuff that we require in our grants. I'm trying to think. There's numerous resources, and they're all for free. And if you're interested, just hit it up there. And that is all I had for now. Does anybody have questions? Quick questions? Okay. I'm going to pass it off to Robin Rebay.
Thank you, Abigail. Thank you, everybody who helped coordinate this. I know Bob gave all the individual thanks, so I won't waste time doing it a second time. Thank you all for coming, because I think that I know this is a diverse audience. I know some of you. I don't know many of you. As I was announced, I am a certified arborist. I do a lot of public work on public policy, tree risk assessment. I'm also a 20-year veteran master gardener, so I have a background in horticulture. My degree is in earth science. I actually studied landscape architecture before I decided that I was much more of a plant person. I did start in art school first, so I have an art science background. And I hope somebody's going to put the slides up. Oh, okay, that's right. I thought, there we go. So most times title slides are kind of like just pretty pictures, but in this case, I actually started with a couple of trees up here, and I don't know how this pointer works, but whoops, it doesn't. Wait a minute. Okay, well, all right. I put pictures up here of trees that you may be familiar with, and I'm going to talk about tree selection, but what I want you to understand is that I get calls all the time about selecting a tree that is not going to cause litter, that won't break the sidewalk, that will not get too tall, too big, won't drop stuff, that it's not poisonous, that won't be allergenic. I mean, the list goes on. And I have to tell you, there is no perfect tree. But I believe there is a perfect place for every tree. And so I really don't want anyone here to think that there is a particular species that we should be honing in on, or that there are species that we should get rid of because they're bad trees. They all came from somewhere, and we're fortunate enough to grow them all here. So there's very few trees that won't grow here, and there's only a few that we shouldn't grow here. But with this, if I can point this thing, I don't know where the... Okay, there's my pointer. Okay, so that's a blue atlas cedar, and again, I don't think these pictures are real pretty, but what I did is I put a couple of my favorite trees up here, and I'm going to tell you why. The blue atlas cedar is a tree that actually will grow and be very tolerant of drought. It is great wildlife habitat. It's prickly. It tends to keep people away from it. It doesn't really need any pruning. So there goes that carbon footprint, okay? You don't have to hire all those people to come in and start cleaning it up all the time. There are hazards. You know, pine trees are flammable. It's not a pine, it's actually a true cedar, but it's a conifer. Don't plant it too close to your house. The next one is Eucalyptus diglepta. It's the only eucalyptus from northern hemisphere. Now, it's not a temperate tree, okay, but it grows here. Now, why do I have it up here? Because I think that bark is glorious. And one of the problems in San Diego, and I came from New York, is that people in this county, by and large, do not love trees. This is what I have found. And I want our public to love trees. And I believe as architects, you want people to love trees too. And I think if we start planting trees with incredible bark, even just a few of them, a little more, that there will be more interest in trees, there will be more interest in people caring for them, and this is a big tree, and it can grow here. So we don't want them lined up and down the street. You'll hear more about that later. That one you can barely see is a forest pansy. It's a eastern redbud. It is purple leaves. Most of you probably know it. If you don't, it should be replacing the purple leaf plum, which you'll hear about later. Bad tree right now. And that's over here, the floss silk. For those people who think that trees block views. Great tree. It's like having this gigantic sculpture in your yard. So you have a client who wants a very sparse landscape and they don't want any trees. Well, suggest a sculpture. And it flowers. And guess what? You won't want to prune that one either because it has chlorophyll in the bark. And what the result of having chlorophyll in the bark is that animals would come and start eating around the bark because they could get nutrition from it. And guess what? The tree's defense is it grew thorns. So now we have a thorny trunk that keeps animals and people off of it. And again, don't have to prune it much. It's a pretty well-behaved tree. So, slide 2. Of course, my favorite, eucalyptus. And if you notice, I have a bunch of D words over here. Oh, gosh, I don't know why this doesn't like to do that. I'm going to have problems with this. Okay, arborists talk about 4 Ds, and that's why I put more Ds up here. So our 4 Ds are about pruning. We're only supposed to prune trees if they're dead, diseased, decayed, or deformed, okay? So you see, disease has already made it up to this list. It's pretty important to start considering a lot more than pruning, as far as I'm concerned. Pruning should not be in the showcase that we have it right now. Right now, pruning, staking, all this stuff we do to trees, it predominates thinking right now. I think we should be looking at growing trees that need very little maintenance. That's going to help reduce the carbon footprint that you heard Bob talk about. So damage. I think everybody has a version of this kind of slide with trees falling over, pulling the grass with them, and in this case, you know, the fire hydrant here. I suspect the fire hydrant maybe have been dug after the tree got planted. It's a pretty big mature tree, may have been there 150 years, maybe before the fire hydrant. So the process of digging all the piping probably undermined some of the buttress roots for this tree. Then it's so close to the curb here, I suspect that somebody along the line, oh, this is going to be fun. Maybe I need a new pointer. Okay, sorry about that. So this kind of process should not happen. And it happens a lot. I see it happen in storms across the East Coast. We don't have it happen as much here, but we do have it happen. And every time I see a large tree fail, my question is, what did we do to it? Trees don't just generally fall on their own. If you've ever tried to dig out even a small tree that's healthy, I mean, I have a difficult time, and I've planted thousands of trees, and I've removed quite a few of them. And if they're a healthy tree, it's very, very hard to get a tree out. And so when they just fall over like this, it's usually because we've done something wrong. Now, this slide actually was not part of my original presentation. I put it here because Brian Kempf was going to be here and talking to you from the Urban Tree Foundation. He's one of my friends and colleagues. And this is a slide from Dr. Ed Gilman, not a slide, but these 2 pictures here. Now, if you've never seen them, this is the one slide I want you to think about today more than any other slide that I show you, because this to me is symptomatic of what we're doing wrong with tree selection, and it's not about species, it's about nursery quality. And some people look at this and they don't actually see a difference between this tree and this tree. Hopefully, most of you, you've been around trees a lot. hopefully you do. Maybe someone's pointed this out, maybe not. If you're not in the category of somebody who's ever had it pointed out, all the branches are coming from one place here, and here they're sort of staggered around up and down the trunk, and hopefully radially as well as in one place. So when you see a tree where all the branches are coming from one central point, and usually about eye height or just a little higher, it's generally the result of the tree being topped in the nursery. And why? Why? Because lots of trees don't branch out when they're young, or nurseries grow them very close together in buckets, and they can't have enough room to grow, so they basically tuck all the lower limbs off, the tree gets growing, and nobody wants to buy a toothpick, unfortunately. They should, because that's the healthiest tree. But if you're going shopping and you're a resident, or even if you're an architect, there's a lot of people who want instant gratification. So what happens? The nurseries top the trees, they put on a flush of growth, lots of nice branches, lots of green canopy, and then what happens? Looks good, unless you know better. And so the vast majority of our urban trees, and I challenge you to go back to your neighborhoods, walk up and down the street, you will see more trees that look like this than this. And it causes a nightmare of pruning for the rest of the tree's life if it's not corrected within the first 3 or 4 years. Root problems are the other side of it. And while you're kind of looking at that fun picture, I brought a nursery tree in. And I bought this tree at a nursery. It's a ginkgo. And when I actually pointed out to the nurseryman that maybe he should give it to me rather than sell it to me, and he said, "What's wrong with it?" And I said, "Well, first of all, I can't even pull it out of the ground. It's growing through the pot." So he yanked it up, took a knife, cut the bottom of it off, and said, "It's perfectly fine." And I could see on the surface of the pot that the roots were really bad. So I questioned him again, and I said, "Well, I'm buying this for educational purposes. Do you want me to tell where I bought it?" He says, "It's fine. It's a good tree." So, okay. So here we have it. And I don't know if you can see, but the tree is not only round from having been in the pot, it's also square at the top from having been in a liner. So those root type circling, they don't go away. The tree doesn't get planted and then the roots all spread out. So what happens is that if this tree hadn't been sold to me, someday they would have lifted this out, put it into a 15-gallon container, and it would have had more circling roots. And then later on, it would get picked up and put into a 24-inch box. And then probably after that, into a 36, and you get the picture. So the problem is that by the time municipalities get trees, they've very often been rejected by everyone. And now a city doesn't see it. They order 400 trees, and they show up in a truck, and they get delivered to a site, and maybe all you're seeing is what's on top. And it's a serious problem. Welcome to look at this. In fact, you can still see, this is the typical liner. It's square, and that's what's on top of the tree. And then after it came out of that, it got put into another container. Roots. I have a problem with people saying that we need a species that won't break sidewalks and driveways. We have technology today that needs to start looking at improving infrastructure, finding ways to adopt our sidewalks and our driveways to behave better around our trees. It's much easier to engineer hardscape than it is to engineer a tree. So I'm not saying that we don't maybe have some vision on giving enough soil volume to our trees and selecting species that are not so thirsty that they will go anywhere for water. But all trees need water and they all need soil volume. And all too often I see this. I mean, not this particular picture, but I have seen where in order to comply with ADA requirements, concrete gets pushed right up to the trunk just like this because it's safer. Somehow you won't trip on the root. So now you have something that ends up like this. I don't actually believe it's a species fault. And this is one of my favorite examples. This happens to be 2 liquid ambers. And if you look at the first one here, okay, they're actually pretty close to the same size trunk. This one, they're growing about the same distance from a sidewalk, homes, they're both in lawns, they're both on a slight incline, but this one looks like something for Halloween. I mean, it's seriously bad surface roots, just one of the worst I've ever seen. And this one, you can barely see a surface root at all. Why? They're both liquid ambers. Well, the really scary thing is they're growing next door to each other. Okay, so here's that one that's really horrible, and here's that one that's pretty good. Same soil, same moisture, same weather patterns, same slope. You know, so what's the difference? Is it really the liquid amber's fault? I don't believe so. I actually think that cultural practices affect tree roots and tree growth and problems like this as much as the species. And it's something we need to be cognizant of, because if we get the roots going well when they're young, if they start out like this, they're going to bulge out eventually, and there's no place to go. They're not going to stretch out, they're going to bulge. And as they get bigger, I'll show you before I'm done, I have one more sample for you. Okay, I'm going to skate through this a little bit quick because Bob talked about it a bit, but this is from Dr. McPherson's research. And I know as architects, I hear so much about scale, about consistency. We need to keep things in proportion. We want things similar. And I understand good design, I really do. But I see a progress going on, mostly in this county, where nobody wants big trees. They see big trees as problems, nuisances, and we're not even growing them to live 300 years. We're happy if a tree seems to live 20 years. People tell me that my tree's getting big and old. I'm saying, how long have you had it? Oh, 15 years. And I think, well, that's not very old. But anyhow, this is Greg McPherson's research and what they call the large tree argument. This is a city that was conceived. It's not a real city, but the idea here is that the value of a large tree is disproportionately more valuable than the value of a small tree when you count all those things in the carbon footprint, that you can't just plant 3 small trees and get the same value as a big tree, even though it would seem to work that way. And here's the sample city, where they planted 1,600 small trees, and here they planted 1,600 large trees, same amount of middle-sized trees, and the net benefit was about $65,000 difference over the lifetime of the tree. So, and that's kind of a projected out 40 years. So this is something that I think, again, we really need to look at how we can get larger trees into our environment. And I would plead with everybody who's responsible for specifying trees to think more about that. If you're not familiar, this is the UFEI. I say UFE. I have no idea what they really call it. The Urban Forest Ecosystems Institute. It was put together through Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And if you're not familiar with Dr. Ritter, Matt Ritter, he's a friend and colleague, and if you don't own his book, I highly suggest you get it. He helped put some of the information and the fields together for this website. If you want to know more about specifying trees, this is an excellent place to go. The cool thing about it is you can do queries. And so in this case, I did a sample query. I spec'd out Sunset Zone 23, which is where I live, which is just a little bit east of the coast. Zone 24 would be here. I said I want to find trees that are at least 35 feet or greater in height. I want some trees that will tolerate dry soil and have moderate branch strength and only medium root damage potential. Now, I would recommend if you do this site that you only put in 3 attributes, but I put in 5, and I still got 86 trees. Okay, so it gives you a lot of food for thought, you might say. And there's a lot of parameters you can look for. Now, I want to caution you that some trees in there just don't have a field. So you may ask for a drought-tolerant tree, and there may be one that won't show up in your query. So don't take it as the only way to look. And if you want to know about a tree that you don't know about, you can also look up the name and find lots of characteristics, pictures, images. It helps you ID trees you don't know, or maybe learn more about them. So I just have a couple of samples. Tipuana here, down here in the bottom, fever tree here, and the proverbial, I imagine those are Canary Island pines. And I wanted to mention, because I saw that in Bob's presentation, he had a big truck that was pruning these Canary Island pines. And it's a good example of a tree that really shouldn't be pruned at all. I mean, maybe an errant dead branch or something that gets broken, but in general, I see these things thinned for no particular reason. And I know they were thinned in my block, which is in the city of San Diego, and I was appalled to see it. And somebody spends a lot of money, it hurts the tree, it's bad for the carbon footprint. So we need more vigilance, not only just specifying trees, but making sure there's code compliance to manage them better. I'd like to address scale a little bit, because again, I think there's this sense that if you have a one-story house, you really probably shouldn't have anything more than a two-story tree. I don't know where that came from, but I've heard it over and over. Scale, proportion, and I understand all that, but I came from a place where trees were enormous, and that was okay. And personally, I understand San Diego, people have view issues, there's lots of things, but there's great opportunities to have big trees. And this is a sample of a tree that's hardly ever used. It's a small little ranch house. It doesn't have a sidewalk, you can't really see it, but that's the curb. So there's no parkway, no sidewalk. There's virtually nothing else growing on this home. And I mean, this adds a huge amount of value to this house. And what kind of a tree is it? Any guesses? Most people don't know. Even I didn't know until I got a little closer. It's a black acacia. A lot of people think that's a terrible tree. Weird tree, I hear. And I say, this is my favorite tree almost in all of San Diego. So I think, again, it's re-examining species, looking at where they grow well. And by the way, if you look, you can't hardly tell in this picture, but there's not a lot of root damage. And I think it's something to consider also, that the small homes are often in congested neighborhoods that don't have a lot of sidewalks, that don't have a lot of trees because they're all close together. Does that mean the people who live in those places just are stuck with only little landscaping? And I don't think that's good, because the big places get the big trees, and those are often the wealthier people who have bigger lots and bigger homes. So I think we have to start looking at planting bigger trees in those smaller spaces wherever we can. And you can go back and look at these. These are some of the species that I think that have some plants and specimens, species like acacia, that was one of them. There's some species we don't plant very much, and this is not an exclusive list by any means, but to me it's something to consider, that we're not using our palette very well. Disease. Drought. I'm going to let Bill talk about the drought, but what happens with drought is insect pests come in and they're opportunists. And this has to do with tree selection, because we are facing some of the most serious threats to our environment because of climate change, because of drought, because of pests are being brought in from every other country. They come in on boats, they come in by ship. People bring stuff in by plane, and it's really serious. I don't know if you're familiar with the North American chestnut. I grew up in the streets of New York City, and my father used to take me walking, and we bought little bags of hot roasted chestnuts. And I have to tell you, it was like so wonderful to sit there, and my dad would tell me about these enormous chestnut trees that he remembered seeing. And by the time I got a little older, I was like, where are those trees? you always told me about those great big chestnut trees. And both my parents were attorneys and they were environmentalists, and they were like, well, they're gone. So it kind of really did affect me, but it wasn't until like maybe about 10 years ago that I did some research on them, and I learned just how many we lost. And I'm not kidding, 4 billion trees were lost to the chestnut blight. 4 billion in 1904, or over that period of time, that was enough for every person on the planet at the time. And if you think that just happened then, it's not the case. We're facing even worse stuff now. Here's some of the pests that are coming, or here, I should say. You may be aware of the gold-spotted oak borer. Depending on who you ask, we've lost somewhere between 20 and 80,000 trees in our out country. It's sickening. It came because somebody brought it in on a piece of firewood from Arizona, and it spread radially out from our parks. And people are still bringing that firewood. It showed up in La Jolla. So, you know, it's innocent in many ways, but it means that we have to be vigilant about having diversity. This is the glassy-winged sharpshooter, another imported pest. It spreads a bacteria called Xylella fastidiosa. It could attack anywhere from 70 to 90% of the species of trees that grow in our county. That's ornamental, edible, and credible. I mean, it's awful. It also could wipe out the grape industry, which was the wine industry, so they got on it. And there are some species that we're looking at that we maybe don't want to plant because they're more susceptible. This is the Asian citrus psyllid. You may have heard about it. I hope you've heard about it. If you don't and you own a citrus tree, California is the last bastion on the planet that does not drench their trees, their citrus trees, in pesticides because of the greening disease, the Asian greening disease. And it's coming. It hit Florida, it hit Texas, it's in Mexico, it's on its way here, and it was brought into Los Angeles deliberately by somebody who grafted a piece that they got from somebody else onto their tree in their backyard. So this is how this stuff happens, and we really stand to lose all of our citrus. It's an incurable disease. This is the Polyphagous shothole borer, new pest. Takes out avocados, and again, could take out 70 to 90% of all of our ornamental trees. I mean, it's sickening when you think about it. So when you ask, what's a good tree? All of it. And we need as many species as possible. Myoporum thrip. That one's not actually as bad because it's not vectoring a disease, it's just causing some problems. So, are we making good choices in genes? Okay. I meant genes, as in genetics. Okay, I wanted to see if you were still paying attention. I know this is a popular tree, Italian cypress. You know, it serves a sort of a vertical purpose. It also has a bacterial canker that's incurable. And they deteriorate and they look horrible, and you can't really prune it out. So don't plant it. Evergreen pear blooms, gorgeous white blooms in February. Like, don't we love it? But it gets serious fire blight. And so it's a high maintenance tree, and fire blight's also incurable. So again, you know, we really want to think twice about planting trees we know that have problems when we have so many other things that have in our palette we could do. This is the Myoporum. That's a rather healthy looking one. At the moment, if you have Myoporums, you know they don't look very good. And this is the venerable purple leaf plum, another bacterial canker. And also terribly topped in the nursery. Very seldom actually look very good. So 4 trees that are very commonly planted in San Diego, and we really ought to think about not planting these. So diversity kind of goes along with this. Monoculture, 1971, Detroit, 1984, Dutch elm. And a lot of people think all these things happened like years ago. But San Francisco just lost thousands and thousands of elm trees in the 90s. So this is an ongoing issue, and we're losing more and more trees. And we're going to be losing more and more trees if we keep planting the same trees and not enough diversity. One of the interesting things about Dutch elm is that it traveled underground. And so one of the reasons that it was so bad is that the disease would affect tree A, and the roots touched underground, and it spread through the soil, through the mycorrhiza, through the roots touching to the next tree. So some of the only Dutch elms left in the world, or left in the country, were actually single solitary specimens, like at the courthouse where there was only one tree and it didn't get the disease. Very unusual, but some of the ones that we have left, that's where they were. So monoculture is a serious problem. So I don't know if you've heard about the 10-20-30 rule, and if you haven't, they've already kind of tossed it out the window, and we're aiming for the 5-10-20 rule. And that really says that no matter what kind of a design you're doing, you want to think about no more than 5% of any species, whether it's in one backyard plan, whether it's a street or an entire city master plan. You want to start looking at no more than 5% of one species, no more than 10% of a genus, and no more than 20% of a family. And that family part gets interesting because a lot of people don't know how trees are related. Like, who would know that a pomegranate was in the same family as a crepe myrtle? I didn't. So, you know, you have to kind of really do your homework if you want to try to adhere to rules like this. So here's an example. This is the Myrtaceae family. And the ones in bold are the ones we commonly have here in San Diego. So, you know, it's not hard to do. Might be hard to avoid, though, if you had a whole lot of, you know, New Zealand Christmas tree. We got Melaleuca. We got Brisbane box. We got Feijoa, peppermint tree. So a lot of trees that we commonly plant are all in this family, and it's a great family of plant. I love the Myrtaceae trees because they're very, very well adapted, and a lot of them are very Mediterranean. But if we're going to stay with that rule, you want to, you know, start using these as much as possible, but on the other hand, no more than 20%. Now, when you're doing the designs, I don't know what you ask clients or what clients ask you. I know as a horticulturalist, people will come to me, what kind of tree should I plant? And sometimes they'll say, well, you know, I like my neighbor's tree. And they'll point across the street where they live. I want one of those. And I'll go, well, you know, actually, you probably wouldn't do very well in your yard. And that's like, people don't get microclimates. But if I have a tree in my yard, it's facing northeast, and my neighbor's front yard is facing southwest. That tree, that same tree that's thriving in my location, might be burning up in their location. So when we line our streets on both sides with the same species, you're sort of setting up a process where not only are some trees not going to be as happy as others, but you're also looking at all the species being the same, this tendency to have disease, and if you plant them all at once, they're all the same age, which is another problem. So this looks pretty on paper, but we want to make sure that when we're selling our ideas and our designs to policy, to cities, that we're aware and we convey how important this diversity is. And we have to kind of change what we've been doing. Some people think the answer is to go native. And quite frankly, in most of the country, I think it's a good idea. I think in most of the country, the native trees thrive and thrive better than anything else. In San Diego, not so much. And why is that? Well, our urban environment was not here, was not native either. And so when you look at trying to establish a nice ecology here, you know, my sense is the way to improve the ecology here is to sort of say, okay, when are you leaving? Because all our streets, all our pavement, all our shopping centers, they're not native either. And we can't recreate chaparral on the sidewalk. And most people who are big advocates for native trees can't even name 10 trees. And if they do, they're liable to be some of these. And unfortunately, as much as I like sycamores and cottonwoods, I don't actually think they make such great street trees. And actually, the cottonwood probably is in some ways a better street tree than a sycamore. But sycamore is like the #1 tree I see because it's native. So let's plant it. Hummingbirds love it, by the way. I'm a big advocate for planting native trees where we can. But I don't think they necessarily need to be on streets because something like a sycamore loses its leaves in August, September, and we know how hot it can be in October, right? Then the big question is, what is a native tree? I happen to love desert willow. I have one in my yard. I have a hybrid. It blooms from April to November, nonstop. It doesn't set seed. Now, I love it. But if I was to look at sustainability, hybrids in general are not necessarily sustainable, because what is a hybrid? Well, if it's not setting seed, there's something going on with the genetics, right? It can't reproduce itself. So there can be problems with these kinds of things. And then you get into a question of, is a Torrey pine native in El Cajon? Or is a redbud native to Coronado? You know, so you really have to look a little closer at what's native. It doesn't mean it won't grow there, but is it necessarily a better tree? I think that a lot of the non-native trees that are Mediterranean, we have a big palette because there's, as you know, on the latitude on the globe, I didn't have a map of it, but if you look, Chile, South Africa, the actual Mediterranean, Australia, and us, that's it. But there's a lot of trees within that palette. And, you know, I think we need to re-examine eucalyptus. I know a lot of people hate eucalyptus. They think they're fire hazards. They think they fall apart. They fall down. They have bad roots. I've heard it all. And for every bad one, I can show you amazing, healthy ones that don't seem to have those problems. We brought in the blue gum, the red gum, the sugar gum, some of the trees that really did not have the things that we need from an urban tree. But it doesn't mean we should lambaste the whole family. And so, because there are our skyline trees, and we don't have a lot of skyline trees, we need to re-examine some of these big trees. Whoops. I don't know why I don't have any text here. But anyway, these are habitat plants. Habitat gardening or habitat planning. I know a lot of you are being asked to design or help install landscape designs where wildlife habitat is encouraged. And again, native plants are really good for that, but with native trees, we just don't have enough. And in many cases, like using the monarch butterfly as an example, monarch butterflies don't migrate to Mexico on the west coast. They migrate to the California coast in the winter. And so what we really need to look at is, why is that happening? And I have to tell you, I'm a native plant person, and I am a devoted conservationist. And I'm also a birder. And as a person who loves to go out and watch birds, it's funny to me that I can be out in an open space in a native plant environment, and I will be with my colleagues and friends, and they will point out some nasty non-native plant, particularly a tree, like a eucalyptus, terrible. And then they'll see a bird, and they'll say, oh, wow, a cool bird. That bird, we never see that bird. Isn't that cool? It's great. Wow. You know, it's a rare bird. It's a bird that's never been here before. It's coming here. Isn't that great? So it's the same people, but the bird is just trying to find a place to go, to eat, to thrive, to live. And why are these rare birds coming here? Well, because maybe where their climate is no longer suitable. Maybe the food sources are gone. Many, many reasons. But I think we really need to look at habitat in a much bigger way than we have. That it's not just put in a nice native plant garden and it's exclusive. We need to provide the things that we know habitat needs. But again, let's not be too doctrinal about it. I included some links, but quite frankly, I think most of you probably know most of these links. Each one of them does have some things that tie to birds. So if you want to attract a particular bird, you want to know about a particular native plant, you might not be familiar with the nature bites at the Natural History Museum, little videos on all these plants. So kind of cool stuff if you're interested. Master Gardeners also has a sustainable, earth-friendly garden plaque that you can get, kind of similar to the National Wildlife Federation one. Palms. I sort of have a love-hate relationship, I suppose, myself with palms, because I understand now, having had palms in my own yard, and I'm taking some out on Monday. So they dominate our landscape. I don't think we should just take them all out, but I don't think we should be planting any more. They don't have the same ecological and ecosystem benefits that our trees do. They don't grow the same way. In this case, they're happiest in washes, and they're not native plants. We do have one native palm, and it's not native to a street. This is what we have to remember. And then there's this maintenance issue. Palms are very, very maintenance intensive, a lot of carbon footprint. And so no matter how you feel about them, if you need a tall, narrow tree, there are alternatives. And I got some pictures, They really are iconic, and I get it. But, they're monocots. They're really more similar to a grass than to a tree. They don't have annual rings. They don't perform those services. And probably bigger than that, I was involved in the Fire Safe Council during some of the urban fires we had. And if you haven't seen any of the photographs of like the Scripps Ranch, Rancho Bernardo, when the fires were leaping the freeways, one of the main reasons that those fires spread were not eucalyptus, but they were palms. And the palm fronds would ignite, the winds blew out, and they were like flaming arrows flying across the landscape. And so, again, I'm not an advocate for taking them all down, but I do think we have to be wary. And just so you don't think I'm being terrible about it, another show and tell. There is some virtue to palms. This is a piece of a palm frond, and that's an oriole nest. And I have nesting orioles in my palms, and I'm going to miss them. So, there are virtues. They're great habitat. So I say, don't take them all out, but if you really are planting new landscapes, let's not plant more palms. Oh yeah, this is a fun one. This kind of startled me, if you want the truth, because if you're like me, you get a catalog and you order new seeds, new bulbs, new plants, new trees, everything. Every year, I'm a fruit person, so I have to get a new fruit tree every year. And I pour through the books, and it's so cool. But it gave me a lot of thought when I realized that what we're doing right now with propagation seriously affects sustainability of plants. And one of the key reasons for that is that we are using tissue culture, cuttings, propagating from one tree to another. So in effect, we're making clones. So if we have not only a street lined with the same species, they may be sisters. They may even be twins. And so this, climatically, is a serious problem. And over time, when you start getting these pests and threats and disease, I've actually heard some nativists who think that we should maybe bring new native trees into our environment so that we can increase the gene pool to make them stronger and more resilient. So it's a lot to think about, and I don't have all the answers. But, it's something I wanted to bring to your attention. And the laboratory that's talking a lot about it, again, I'm just mentioning it because I kind of follow what they're doing. These are big data crunching places. This Department of Energy, they're the ones who kind of talked about what this phenotype plasticity is. And that really, in a nutshell, is the ability of plants to adapt to climate change. So if you're not familiar, look at this. What they're crunching is pretty amazing, and they are considering the urban environment. Now, whether they're considering Southern California or San Diego, probably not so much, but it's a good place to be looking. If you're not familiar with the Solar Shade Act, I wanted to mention it because there's sort of a misunderstanding that trees can't block solar. And I worked for the California Center for Sustainable Energy for about 5 years. And I actually went to my own seminar one day, and somebody was up at the podium, and they said, God, if we could just get rid of all the trees, we'd be all right. And I thought, oh my God, this is terrible. And there are unscrupulous people out there who are going to homeowners and telling them to cut down the trees that are shading their homes because they will shade the solar collector. Now, I have to tell you, not only is that a terrible carbon footprint issue, but actually they're increasing their need for energy by taking out the trees that are shading their home. So there's other ways and means to develop sustainable energy, and I'm all for it, and I'm not against solar. I used to install solar, so I get it, but I don't think we should be taking down our trees. And if you're not aware, the trees have precedence. This act was done in 1978, and if the tree dies, okay, not only does your tree have precedence, if you have a tree and it blocks your neighbor's panel, if your tree was there first, it stays. But if your tree dies and your neighbor has a panel, you're allowed to replant that tree or another tree in its place, even if it grows bigger and blocks your neighbor's panel again. Okay, so the trees do have precedence. And you can find it in the Public Resources Code there. I just put this little image up because I thought it was cute, but they actually used an oak tree and how the branches are set and how the leaves open and close to do biomimicry to design solar collectors, because trees do it so efficiently. Okay, and this is kind of my last little plug, partly because I know some of you may be involved with community gardens, school gardens, food forests. It's big talk right now. I don't think you do it so much for sustainability, although I do think that the idea of the local food movement is valid. And we have more small farms in this county than any other county in the nation. So we should be growing more local food. It does well here. I have pictures here. I don't know if they show up very well, but this is just a bunch of acorns on the ground, and that is a bunch of pecans on the ground. Now, why not grow pecans instead of acorns? And I get people question this a lot because you'll trip on the nuts. I'm thinking, well, you're going to trip on them anyway. You might as well trip on something that's worth picking up. I was just in the East Coast. My mother spent hours and hours picking up acorns. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if you could bring them in and eat them? And I know the Kumahai did that here. But I don't think too many people are eating acorns right now. And I have a pecan tree, so I know you can do it. And they do grow well here. This is Seattle, supposedly the first food forest in the nation. I haven't seen it, but I do have my kids up there, so I'm going to go see it one of these days. And again, the idea of it is that to create a public place where people can see what's done and share food and grow food in a communal setting. It's supposedly been well designed. I don't really know too much more about it, but you can check it out. There's a YouTube video. I've been in Spain. They grow fruit trees on the street there. And I was blown away. I thought, wow, this is cool. But in Logan Heights, they tried to propose that. And you know what the number one argument about planting fruit trees on the street is? People might actually eat the fruit. Okay, again, all trees, all of the fruiting trees make fruit, just only some make edible fruit. I listed some of the drought-tolerant ones. They're not all trees. I got grapes in there, but grapes can get almost the size of a tree if you let it go. We have a tremendous ability in San Diego County, and particularly in East County, to grow many, many numbers of trees. And you really need to know, though, if you're going to help, I know corporate places that are looking to maybe convert their lawns instead of throwing gravel and cactus at them. Maybe plant some apple trees. Maybe plant some pecan trees. So there's an opportunity right now to convert a lot of alleys, parks, backyards, front yards, schools, not to mention community gardens. Now, there's things you have to know. Chill hours. We don't have a lot of winter. So there are trees that will not come out of dormancy if it doesn't get cold enough. I have a few. We had a lousy, we didn't have much cold last winter. So that's something you need to know. You need to educate yourself. It has to get between 30 degrees and 45 degrees so many hours over the course of the winter, and you literally add them up. So if it gets cold between 30 and 45 in 3 weeks from now for 2 nights, and I add it up, then I got 8 hours of chill. Okay, and then I add another 4 hours, and I keep adding it up, and hopefully you get to maybe 100 hours, 200 hours of chill, and that's how you know whether you'll see that on the label of a tree. If you don't, it's probably too high chill a tree. Frost sensitivity is another feature. You know, with the climate changing, I think that's going to be less and less of an issue, but we may get extremes. We may get extreme cold weather too, along with our extreme drought and extreme wet. So every degree matters when you're talking about fruit trees. You know, it might tolerate freezing. It might go down to 27, but maybe 26 will kill it. So you need to know. Again, disease resistance, rootstocks, that's another one. I hear people tell me, I got a dwarf tree, how come it's so big? If you have an apple tree and its natural tendency is to be 40 feet, and you get dwarfing rootstock that dwarfs it 50%, how big is it going to be? 20 feet, right? If you want a 10-foot tree, you have to get it to dwarf it 75%, right? So there's many, many types of rootstock, and if you don't know and you just say, I got a dwarf, you're in trouble. Lots of good links here. The UC Master Gardener state website is one of the best I know for horticultural information, not just for fruit trees, but for ornamental trees as well. So I'm kind of closing up here. I am optimistic in spite of all the doom and gloom maybe I gave you today. But I do think we have to be vigilant. I think that if we're creative and we start looking to make our technology work for us instead of against us, you know, we will prosper. But keep in mind, trees have been here way longer than us, and some of our most successful trees were during the dinosaur time, and they're still here. And so it's a shame when I have to bring in a ginkgo that has been damaged by a human. Okay, when that ginkgo was here, was growing during the Jurassic period. Okay, well, thank you very much, and I'm going to introduce Bill Homiak, who at one time was my instructor many, many years ago. So he's a faculty member at Southwestern Community College, and I'm going to turn it over to Bill.
Thank you. Thanks, Robin. Thanks. Very interesting. I enjoyed that. And you'll be happy to know that I live in San Diego, and I love trees. Oh, well, okay, so... Yeah, I do love trees. I love trees and I love turf. So I've been hit pretty hard the last few years because I'm driving around, I'm seeing lots of dead lawns and trees that are starting to also kind of get to that point. Yes? Oh, the clicker. Thank you. Okay. All right. I'll get to that in a sec. All right. Thank you. But we are talking about trees, of course, and you guys all look like shrubs to me. Would you like to stand up and stretch a little bit? It's kind of chilly in here. Go ahead if you like to do that. I was kind of getting a little tight back there myself, so. I'll let you advance it. Thanks. But my wife and I do live on a block where there's about 20 houses, and the houses were built in 1978. Every house has a slope behind it. And we're the only ones that still have the original eucalyptus trees there. So we have a love-hate relationship with those eucalyptus trees. They provide the privacy and screening and noise abatement. And but we have to budget about $2,000 every 2 years to trim those trees. So I understand why my neighbors don't have them anymore. But still, we would not do without those. You know, of course, we are losing a lot of lawns, and that's okay. I'm I'm a lawn person, but I understand we have a lot of lawns that are useless in the wrong spot, and I'm glad they're being taken out. And also, if you think about it, we can always put a lawn back in pretty easily if we decide after the drought we want it back. Trees, on the other hand, were kind of like, today I took a drive through older Chula Vista, downtown Chula Vista. I went on Hilltop and F Street, and I decided to do a very scientific survey as I was driving along, cruising along about 20 miles an hour, trying to keep people from honking at me as I'm trying to look at all these street trees and kind of assess their health. And Chula Vistas, of course, they're pretty well known for having a good palette of street trees and trying to keep them up real well. And thought maybe I'd do a little quiz for you guys, because you've driven around a little bit too. And I'll name a tree, and what I did is I kind of just gave it a rating. When I looked at all the trees on a particular block and they're all the same species, I would give it a rating. 100% if they all look good, 0% they're all dead, 50% would be, you know, one's dead, one's healthy, or maybe they all died back by 50% or something like that. So the ones I saw, and I'll just read them off, and you can yell out and tell me how healthy you think they were. Podocarpus gracilior. Any guesses? They were, I couldn't find a single thing wrong with those. They were doing great. And you know, when you're driving along, what you're really seeing though is these are street trees. They're in the parkway or the parking strip, or they're just barely in the lawn. And there's no question that when you see an unhealthy one, you look down, the lawn hasn't been watered in ages. And then you see a healthy one, and yeah, it looks like they've been watering. So there is some correlation there, but there's some other things going on too. But, liquid amber. Yeah, 50 is pretty good. It was basically 60% healthy by my exacting scientific survey. Okay. Chinese flame tree. They're beautiful right now, actually, and there's some gorgeous ones in Chula Vista, and they were about 80% healthy. I'm seeing a little bit of tip dieback on some of them, but they were pretty darn good. California pepper tree. 100% healthy, yeah. They're glad we've turned the water off on the lawn, aren't they? Okay, so they're doing good. Southern magnolia. Yeah, they were only about 30 to 40% healthy from what I saw. And it was very, very, very critical about whether they were watering or not. You could definitely tell that. But most of the top branches were already dead all the way down to about 50% of the height of the tree. It was kind of sad to see that. Brazilian pepper. They were worse than the California pepper. They were not doing as well, right? But they were probably still 85% healthy. I think Chula Vista wants to get rid of them anyway, which would be good, and that'd be fine by me. You were mentioning earlier purple leaf plum. Yeah. It's hard to say whether they were already deciduous, but they look pretty dead to me, of most of them that were there. And then finally, deodar cedar. There weren't too many of them, but the ones they saw were 90%. I had 80% down, so yeah. So, you know, yes. Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. Right. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. So, you know, when I get into the talk here, I'll just talk a little bit about, you know, you can see a tree that looks like it's 80, 90% healthy, but is it now to the point that if we don't get the El Nino this next year, that next year it'll be this 50, 60, 40% healthy? And I think that's what's happening with a lot of our trees right now, which is kind of sad. So, all right, so I got to figure this out now, right? Okay. There we go. I'm a teacher. I should be able to do this. Okay. So, you know, and we've had some great speakers today, and so I'll try to go over some of this a little quicker that's already been talked about. But we all know that drought is, you know, putting a lot of stress on our trees. I really think, you know, that our trees are kind of hit with I was going to say a triple whammy, but now I'm almost up to the quadruple whammy right now. The drought, with no question. The continual year after year of not getting the cleansing rains, the deep rains that really invigorate the tree to grow the next year, to wash out the salts. That's the first big whammy that's happening, the year after year. We've had a little bit of a reprieve with some of these storms that have come in that have kind of maybe helped a little bit of flush of growth, but overall, they're still way behind. What would be the second whammy? Well, the fact that we have water restrictions. So now we have trees that not only didn't get the winter rains, but now the homeowner has to decide, oh, I can only water on this day and this day for 5 minutes. You know, and they don't even know the rules yet because they're kind of weird. And maybe the rules apply to the lawns and not to their trees. So they don't realize they can go out and actually soak that tree once in a while. So that's a big impact on our trees. Next impact, of course, would be you can take your lawn out and we'll pay you money for that, okay? That's good, nothing wrong with that. But now in the process of taking out the lawn, are we rototilling? Are we sod cutting and all these surface roots getting damaged at the same time? Tree's going, whoa, wait a minute. And then, of course, after that lawn has been taken out, the new landscape we're putting in is with drought-tolerant plants, native plants with drippers, emitters. And the tree's going, where are my emitters? Okay. Oh, okay, here's 2 for you. That's all you need, right? So that's kind of my quadruple whammy, I guess. And we'll see that, obviously, in the slides here. But so, yeah, a lot of stress on our trees. Year after year, we do know that some trees are going to be more susceptible to borers and beetles and those sort of things that can now bore in. There's no sap pressure, and they can lay those eggs in there, and the larvae can basically girdle that tree or eat the cambium. So certain trees will have beetle damage. Other trees will just, of course, die from the fact that they just aren't getting enough care. All right, so a lot of you are professionals, so you're pretty good at this anyway, but you can drive around and you can start to pick up those symptoms that you see on trees when they haven't had enough water. Leaf symptoms, trunk symptoms, general health symptoms. So we'll look at these kind of individually here. So when a tree or any plant is running out of water, they've really come up with lots of different levels that they can say that that particular plant is at when it's running out of moisture. We know that we like to water our soils to what they call the field capacity. So we're watering it to a point that the soil can hold the maximum amount of water against the force of gravity. And that still leaves aeration in there for the tree, so that's good. And as the tree sucks the water out, soil starts to run out of water. We may not see what they often call the incipient wilting, and that's really where the tree is going, hey, you know, I'm starting to run out of water, maybe I better shut down my stomates a little bit and not lose that much. The leaf still looks pretty good, but it's not growing anymore during that particular time of the day. It's kind of shutting down the processes. Then we, of course, a little bit further along, we see the wilting. It's temporary wilting if it wilts maybe at 4 or 5 in the afternoon. But if you went out there at 10 o'clock at night or at 2 in the morning, it was able to pick up the moisture from the soil and reinvigorate the leaves. So we have kind of a temporary wilting, kind of giving you a clue that, whoops, maybe tomorrow I better irrigate, okay? Or the next day, depending on the type of plant you have. If we get to the permanent wilting point, that's when the tree, of course, or the plant has said, hey, I can't suck the water out anymore. Even if you water it right now, the plant may not recover. That's what they typically mean about that. The plant's going to die. So that's kind of our wilting symptoms. And on different trees, they're different. Some trees the leaves will droop. Others, the edges will curl up. Some will just this canopy, I'm going to get rid of my oldest leaves. Lots of different little symptoms depending on the tree that you're particularly growing. And of course, I'm sure if we were to cut down our tree and look at the rings, we could probably look at the last decade and maybe say, yeah, that's like we had drought almost every single year except that one year that we had 20 inches of rain. That was kind of a freak occurrence, but I'm sure we're going to see much closer rings on our trunks Now, that's an obvious sign there too, that the trunk is not expanding. We're not getting that growth in the xylem and phloem to basically increase the girth of that tree. So we'd have to actually cut the tree down to see it with most of our trees, but with a palm tree, sometimes you will notice that nice and healthy growth, and all of a sudden the trunk gets real narrow like a neck, and then it gets wide again. You can sometimes trace how much rain we've had each year based on the trunk of the palm trees. I did see this a lot. In fact, actually, I took these pictures a few years ago, but this was these magnolias in Chula Vista on F Street, I believe. And, you know, they have that classic dieback coming back in here, kind of supporting the more mature leaves. The young tips have already died in this case. Okay? So when you have a tree that can't produce enough sap, enough energy to go up there and support the young leaves, they're the most sensitive. Leaves are going to fall off, the tips are going to desiccate and die. And this tree could probably be saved if all of a sudden it rained again and we had a little pruning there to help out, take out some of the dead wood. But it's kind of lost its beauty in its shape that it normally takes. Southern magnolia, of course, maybe not the best choice for our particular climate because it loves Florida, it loves deep sandy soil, it loves rainfall, the East Coast. And they can be beautiful here, but they do need the moisture, don't they? And of course, we all know about the pine trees up in the mountains and lots of other trees that just after year, not producing enough sap will not be able to keep the borers away. Nature's way of naturally thinning, but we get kind of upset when we look up there and 70 or 80% of those pine trees are gone. Yeah. Okay, so again, this is a pretty smart audience. A lot of us know how plants use water and how trees search out water, but we'll kind of take a look at that as we go along. Roots, they're not like us. I only have to walk 2 feet to get my dinner, that's where I'm going. I'm not going to walk a mile to get it. And trees are no different. If their water source is right there, that's where the roots are going to go. If the air is there and the water is there, they're going to be very happy. If you have heavy soil that many of you know, you might have moisture that goes down 2 or 3 feet, but if there's no aeration down there, the roots are not going to be searching that part out. They're going to go where there's actually air and water. That's what makes it tough for us in San Diego. Hard, compacted soils in many cases, clay soils. We can't get the water to penetrate deeply, even if we try. Slow sprinklers, run them for an hour, come back later, dig a hole. They got down that far. Whereas if we did that somewhere in Florida, the water would be very, very deep. So it's hard for us to get those deep roots penetrating like we'd like to. So they're going to grow near the surface. And I have a picture coming up that shows a tree blown over that I'll talk about in a minute. Trees and turf, they compete. Sure, they compete for the moisture and the fertilizer that you give the turf. So, of course, now that we're taking the turf out, that tree has had a nice life over the 20, 30 years that there's been turf there, hasn't there? It's been fed, it's been watered, it's happy. Now we just took the turf away, we took the fertilizer away, and probably a lot of the water. So all those surface roots are saying, hey, I need something here. And it's up to us now, if we're in charge of helping the homeowner convert their lawns to drought tolerant, we've got to look not here. Let's look up here for a while, okay? And say, hey, you've got a beautiful tree. And that's number one right now, that we're going to make sure that when we're done with this project, that tree is going to be alive next year and the year after. I'm going to design a system that tree will get what it needs. Okay, so let's not forget about that. And again, I think I'm preaching to the choir, but that's my only big, real reservation about this conversion to drought-tolerant landscapes, is we really have to think about our current urban forest that we have. Of course, we all know that there's a lot of things in our urban environment that, too, if we put a tree in a parking strip, are there going to be a lot of roots out under the asphalt road? Probably not, and that's probably why that tree blew over, too. The roots went to that curb. So we often restrict their ability to grow. Or we dig a hole, with an auger And we stick that tree in there, and that's where the roots stay, don't they? They just can't seem to penetrate the way we have planted them. So, urban situations are not the best for trees, as we know, but we have the technology to get around that. And, there's lots of slides, lots of pictures if you just look around for, typical root growth. And it varies with different trees, but this would certainly be a tree that is growing in a lawn, wouldn't it? And, you might have a few roots that are going down to help to support that tree, but most of them are going to be in the top foot of soil. There might be some heavy roots, support roots that are deeper than that, but that's where most of your feeder roots are. And that, of course, is what we're really concerned about when we are going in there and removing lawns. Can we not disturb those roots? The drip line is another thing. I've always had it kind of in my mind that, I better make sure I irrigate right here and right here. But I think, too, now when we're converting, we better be thinking that we got to irrigate way out here, too, for these trees, not just under the drip line, and certainly, of course, not right by the trunk. Let's give it a little bit more room than just the drip line. So, yeah, soil type. If you were lucky enough to, some of you probably visited Hunter Industries up there in San Marcos, and they have that beautiful park around their factory. And they put in a tall fescue lawn for their employees. It's a beautiful setting with sycamores. And they put on these very slow rotating rotors that they could run for 2 or 3 hours. Okay? And beautiful sandy soil because they're in a creek bed. And they told us that they could turn the water off in September and not have to water that turf for 14 to 20 days because they had established extremely deep turfgrass roots. Boy, wouldn't we love that here? Our roots in turf are about that deep, aren't they? Same thing with our soil, our trees. They have the same difficulty in getting down there. So soil type is real important. Just because you have a sand, though, doesn't mean you have deep soil. Sandy layers, sand can sometimes make cemented layers, so you may have that problem too. So it's not a given that a sandy soil will be deep. And it's also not a given that a clay soil will not drain deeply. Some clays are well aggregated, and you can get decent penetration of water. So you do need to do an analysis of your soil. And certainly in a conversion, that would be very important too. Find out what kind of soil you have so you're picking the right plants for that conversion. So, again, just another slide that shows things we know already. The small plants don't have to go very deep, 3-4 inches. Some of our annuals and perennials may only go that deep. Trees a little bit deeper, hopefully. Be nice if we had tree roots going down 3 feet, but not always. So, we're aware of that and looking up the tree and also trying to figure out, is this tree known for deep roots or shallow roots in the selection process? Even trees that are known for deeper roots, many times in San Diego, where do we find the roots? Very shallow. So you can do the research, you can do the preparation of the hole, do everything you can, but you may not always have success on the depth of the roots. Okay, well, again, here's my tree growing over, or blowing over. And again, you can see it is kind of near a street. This was Hurricane Ivan in Pensacola. What surprised me was when I went back there to help my family was that this tree was just a really large oak tree that in Florida. And I've dug holes in this area, and it's just pure sand until you go down and hit the groundwater. So just the most beautiful draining sand in the world, no layers. This tree blew over, and you could not find a single deep root underneath there. It was just all underneath the, I think that was St. Augustine sod there. So there was just not strong enough roots to, well, of course, obviously the winds were quite high, but it still kind of surprised me that would blow over. And some more right there, some different kinds of trees, but they did the same exact thing. And of course, what you saw here was the trees closest to the road blew over, probably for a couple reasons. They were next to a sidewalk, so the roots probably didn't go far enough to hold it. But also, there was no cover for these trees. The trees further in that had a little bit of cover from the other trees managed to hold up better. And of course, we have the challenge with the fact that if we are introducing natives, a lot of natives have kind of they're obviously used to getting their water in the winter. They don't like water so much in the summer. And then maybe we mix in some other plants in that new landscape that maybe is the opposite, the non-natives, that, their demand when it gets hotter is they want more water. The natives want a little less water, don't they? So that could be a circuiting problem, something you may have to think about in your drip systems, that maybe, I'm mixing them, but maybe I want to circuit them a little bit differently for the irrigation, which you could do, obviously, in a drip situation. Another little challenge when you are designing those lawn replacement type landscapes. And also, of course, if you have a tree that's maybe a little bit more of a native tree versus one of the deciduous trees that we bring from back east that seems to transpire 200 gallons of water a day or something like that. So just be aware you have totally different demands on trees that are more native to California versus around the country. Okay, so since most trees are really going to have a lot of their roots in the top 6 inches, 12 inches of soil, we really have to be aware of not changing the existing grade when we're going in and re-landscaping for taking out the turf. That's especially true to the drip line. As you get a little further away, you have a little more leeway. But again, I still wouldn't be content with, now maybe I'm 10, 15 feet from the drip line. I'm going to bring it up 3 feet. That's not something I'd want to do. I think you have some leeway adding some soil, but as you get in the drip line and closer, try to keep that same existing grade. Don't make drastic changes if you can. None of us are going to put soil around the trunk, I hope, right? We wouldn't do that. Minimize adding new plants, irrigation and lighting right around the tree, because that's going to involve digging holes or trenching and cutting into the roots of that particular tree. So existing tree, let's treat it with respect, and let's keep away from it as much as we can. Try to avoid too much planting under the drip line. Trenching, beautiful uplighting is great, but let's not trench for doing that, those kind of things. Okay, so some little lawn conversions here. So we're going to protect those existing trees when we're taking out lawns or we're taking out existing landscapes and trying to convert them to more drought-tolerant landscapes. We want to keep them for the reasons we've heard here today. A lot of great reasons for protecting our trees. We have to remove that sod, maybe. There's some different thoughts on that now. Protect the tree, and of course put in some irrigation now that's getting away from the typical lawn irrigation with the spray heads and using something a little more efficient, whether it's a drip system or it's rotating nozzle heads, something along that lines. All right, so Carmel Mountain Ranch, kudos to that golf course. They went in and took out I'm thinking it's 15 to 20% of the turf that they had on that golf course by removing areas where you don't need turf. So they took out all that turf, put in some natives, packed in some DG in some places, mulch in others, and I think they're saving a couple million gallons of water a year. I forget what it is. Okay, they're saving lots of water. And I wasn't involved in the project, so it's easy for me to go there a year later and take pictures of a few dead trees, because that's what happened. They took out, you can't see it very well, but this was all turf, and these are pine trees. And you can't tell, but all of these that are in this new DG area are now dead. So was it the tractor going in there scraping off the turf and damaging the roots? This is a year later, and those trees just recently died. So the trees actually lived through the process, and they died about a year later. So was it the fact that a year later they aren't getting the irrigation from the lawn that they used to get? Because of course golf courses are watering quite a bit, aren't they? So it could be either one of those. I don't think they did a lot of grade changes, because I play there enough to know it's not like they went in there and cut big trenches. But that's the kind of thing that will happen. Same thing down here. You can't really tell, but dead pine trees along in here too, where they'd come in and remove the turf. So that was a couple $1 million project to do that. And it was, again, a good idea because of the savings of water, but they did lose some trees in the process. So. You have any comments on that or experiences or thought process? Okay, all righty. So good, all right. So if you are going to be removing turf, if you want to get the turf that's right around the tree roots that are already showing up in your lawn anyway, don't bring a sod cutter in there. You may have to get out the old Maddox and just lightly scrape it out, okay? Let's not go crazy with it, but that's what you're going to have to do sometimes. I've actually seen quite a few crews in the East Lake Otay Ranch area going to those classic little lawns that are in front of the sign announcing a neighborhood, and they're taking those lawns out. And how are they doing it? They spray it with Roundup, and then they're just kind of scraping it off, which I kind of like that. I mean, at least they're not coming in with a heavy sod cutter and possibly damage some roots that way. Yes? This renovation? Or, yeah, I can't tell you that. You have a little experience with that course, but... Okay. Okay, yeah. For... Oh. Interesting. Asphalt grinder. Okay. So you put that on a big tractor and blah, 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 or what? Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Well, yeah, the only recourse then would have been to stay way away from the drip line, but yeah, that's hard. Yeah. The pines, oh, let me think. They weren't. I can't tell you right now. I'd go back and look closer. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Some were Aleppos, but there were some other types too. Yes, go ahead. Okay. Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. That half of the tree died. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I almost think it's a mindset. You know, you go to Pasadena, the most gorgeous large trees in little teeny strips. They tolerate the fact that they have to patch sidewalks, patch curbs, because they love their trees. And, you know, in our case, it's, no, we better cut those roots, you know, because they're going to get into our street. Well, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Oh, yeah, yeah, we have a few slides here in a second, but go ahead. Right.
They're going to underground deeper than that. So it's totally possible to do it. It's just whether the utility will do that or not.
Yeah. Of course, you know, whether or not you want to use a chemical or not like Roundup is kind of up to you. But you do have to be extremely careful in spraying your lawn that you don't have sucker shoots coming up, volunteers, those sort of things that will take that Roundup into the system. Yes, sir. Well, that's again, and you'll see here in a minute, there's kind of a kill it, plant in it, and just let it mulch down. Mulch over it, exactly. You are, of course, going to have to follow up. There's no question that killing's not going to work. You're going to get some Bermuda or some Kikuya, and you have to come back and hit those. But nut sedge, okay. Everybody's going to have their own little. But you know, if you think about it, though, a lot of times when you strip sod, all of a sudden weed seeds come up of all things that wouldn't come up before. You know, so especially if you rototill, that'll all sometimes do that. Newspaper. Uh-huh. Right. That's fine. Okay. Oh, okay, good. All right. But some great input there. Okay. So here we are. One option is to keep the sod and place mulch over it. Okay. I noticed on H Street in Chula Vista that the sod there had been sprayed to be killed. Then I think they even tried to go in and spray it green. I'm not quite sure about that. But, you know, all on the right track. But so anyway, there you go. And so take out the sod or just kill it and let it kind of rot right there. Add irrigation that does not interfere with established tree roots or hand trench around the existing roots. So yeah, we don't want to say, okay, let's just bring that trencher in and just run it all the way down there, because that, of course, is going to cause the exact thing that you talked about. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you have a good point, although if they are cutting through big woody roots, you're not going to get new roots pushing from those. You're only going to get new ones from the little small roots that you damaged, but that's still a good. You prep the tree, and then you also didn't ignore it afterwards, so that's very good. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, you know, the tree's been in luxury for years. It's been watered 2 or 3 times a week for the lawn. Or even if it's next to the lawn, it's probably got roots out in the lawn. So you just can't all say, all right, it's time to start the project. We'll strip the sod, and when are we going to do the next step? Oh, about a month from now, we're coming in with the irrigation, and, you know, the tree's just sitting there. So you need to say, okay, we're going to soak it first, good idea. But now I have to think, how am I going to water this once a week or whatever we think it needs, and not just stand there and, you know, then walk off. You have to figure out a way to get it to soak in around that drip line or a little bit further. So do the entire spot. And if it's a big project, I mean, I know this happens in industry where they are doing a large renovation and they've got existing trees. One of the first steps is install a temporary irrigation system with soaker hoses that goes around every single tree on a time clock. This is going to get watered the entire time this project is being put in. We value our trees in this case. You know, and, you know, this is not what we want, if you can see it. But, you know, we got the little drippers for these new plants with the mulch. Okay, great. This is, you know, perfect. But now we just have this one little loop around here with a few emitters. And just think of the size of this tree up here. I don't care, you know, that this is a half-gallon emitter per hour, and this is a 2. Okay, that should do it. I put 2-gallon-per-hour emitters there. That ain't going to do it, okay? It's not even going to come close. So we got to design for the trees separately. Now, they do show lawn further out there in this picture, and I'm sure that tree's getting some water from that, but you kind of get the drift. Our trees need to be circuited on different valves than the rest of the plants, for sure. So irrigation techniques for stabilizing trees under severe drought conditions, new trees versus existing trees. Again, you can't see this too well, but in this case, they made sure that in putting in this irrigation system with various valves, that one valve was definitely dedicated to the trees, with whether, depending on how you're going to water them, and we can argue about that all day long, whether it's bubblers or bubblers buried down in the ground or whatever. Question? That's a different topic. No. No, I was at the curriculum meeting yesterday for my college, and the topic of turf came up, and one of the ladies on the committee who teaches English, she said, well, don't you teach your students about artificial turf? And I said, we do, with great disdain. And that's basically about it. You do have to teach people about artificial turf because it has become part of the maintenance practices, but no, Totally different seminar, right? On that, yes. No, I hate it. I really do. Okay. All right. Yeah, so, you know, I like this system for the most part. If this is an established tree and we just ripped out all the turf, these rings, you know, with the dedicated little holes every 12 inches or whatever, you know. I just forgot the name of that stuff. Inline dripper, but there's also Netafin. There's the, yeah, okay. I probably shouldn't say that. Now, I can't see the crown up here, so I don't know. This ring could be too close, okay? I'd like to maybe have these guys. And also, I want to be able to expand it if I have to, okay, for the future. Okay? So it's not a bad system, but we don't have all the details in that picture. I don't like, you know, one dripper here and one dripper here for trees. This is a little better, but it still may not be enough. They tell you in drip guides that you should irrigate at least 60% of the root zone when you put drippers in. That may or may not be enough, but just make sure they definitely are out there, okay, and you keep adding to them. There's calculations, of course. You can calculate how much water a tree uses per day. All that stuff is available. Then you can look at your emitters and see if they're really providing that. That's really important. A lot of orchards, when they were first planted, this is the line of your orchard. They would put a dripper right here and here. Makes sense, doesn't it? Just nice in line. You can have your little pipeline right underneath here so you don't catch it with the tractor. So all your rows of trees, and those trees grew up, and the first time they had a big windstorm, they blew over that way, didn't they? Because all the roots were on the side. So you got to have around the tree. I think we know that, but it's easy to make those mistakes. Yeah, we definitely want to have, if we're putting in bubblers or we're putting in whatever kind of irrigation system to irrigate that tree, got to be a separate zone. They have technology now where you can blast the soil out with compressed air, which hopefully will not damage the roots. And then you can snake the pipe in there. So if you got to get a pipe next to a tree, pretty close to it, you might look into that technology where you can get a couple feet from the trunk. I would recommend that never be a constant pressure pipe. Okay, that can be a pipe after the valve, but I would not want to have a constant pressure pipe that close because it's going to get broken in a few years, maybe by the tree roots. So air spade or hand excavation. But you know, hand excavation, you're still going to catch your crew out there sometimes. Whoops, what are you doing with that axe? You know, so take that away from them. This is almost the same picture. In fact, I kind of wonder, because here's a bigger tree right here now. It's almost the same landscape. But yeah, we definitely don't need that ring, do we? Okay, so let's get rid of that one. I can't even see the other. Oh yeah, this is a palm tree. And right near the base, we have a bunch of emitters for that palm tree. Now the palm tree, of course, we may only have to go 3 or 4 or 5 feet away and put the ring out here for the palm tree, but I certainly don't want it, you know, right in that location. They probably put it there to irrigate those succulents or whatever that is there, but okay. Yeah, that's kind of cute, but I don't think I like it much. Okay. Again, during construction, do whatever you can to water the tree to get it through that period until you get that new system in. Whether it be this water bag technology here. Here's the soaker hose. You can do it's just arbitrarily laid around here, but I like it. It's going to come on, let it soak in. Smaller trees, you could, you know, fill up a bucket with water and drill a hole in it and let the water percolate down in there. Lots of different little ideas just to keep the tree alive while you're doing the process. Okay, so that's me. Did we want to, a quick question for me, and then, yes. Very good thought, yeah, like what color rock should you pick, and yeah, or rock at all. I'm going to put that to the audience. Has anybody done any research on gravel under trees? Yes. For their climate, because it's maybe northern. Yeah. Yeah. So here, I think, yeah, as the hotter you get, the more I think you want something that's not going to be absorbing as much heat as that. Yeah. So I think I'll pass this over, and she'll give us an idea of where we're headed next. We're going to stay right here? Yeah. Okay, so the other speakers want to come up, and anybody have some questions? I had a question for Mr. Perry. I got the most. So that project that you did, I think it was Moreno Valley, the center strip, and you said there was no irrigation put in? But then you had in the formula, you were figuring water needs. So was water brought in by a truck occasionally to water those, or did I just misunderstand what was happening there?
Well, thanks for asking that. The intent to not put an irrigation system in was to save the embodied energy of the pipe, as well as to not have to use energy to bring down water year after year. Most of us know that we can put a median in a city, it can last for 50 years or whatever length of time, and we were trying to avoid importing 2.5 acre-feet of water to this project year after year, and thereby save the energy or carbon footprint costs associated with that water. And taking advantage of that for a moment, the studies I do and looking at soil types and volume of water that can be retained in soil, and looking at runoff and calculating the water that you could capture and impound and infiltrate, I think that 50-60% of our landscapes can be sustained on rainfall alone and not need irrigation, supplemental irrigation. And feel that plants grow in response to the moisture they have, and they're self-regulating to a certain extent. When we encourage overgrowth through providing water throughout a long, warm season and facilitate excessive growth, and then we take the water off, a la removing lawns or just simply cutting back, you've created a plant that's really dependent upon that additional supplemental water. And I think we're caught in that syndrome pretty heavily these days. Great.
I had a follow-up question about recycled water. You didn't go into too much detail. Could you just talk a little bit about that? It seemed like it was something that you were saying would require more energy. On the other hand, it's a recycled material. So could you talk about that, recycled water for irrigation?
Yes, I think reclaimed recycled water is a wonderful source for landscape irrigation, and there's an energy cost associated and a carbon footprint cost associated with collecting that water, processing it, and then redistributing it. And so there's that cost. It's less energy than bringing water from Northern California or desalinating water. We have sort of a 1-2 step process. Those first we bring it in, and then we use it once, and then we treat it and use it a second time. So we need to average the costs of importing as well as treating and cleaning for reuse. So reclaimed water does have a little bit higher cost than you might first think about, because there was the initial importing cost that is part of the picture. That's right. Right, and that's a great question, because once you start getting into this assessment process, you realize the materials and energies and resources we invest to create these alternative systems costs a lot. And for my studies, by just looking at very simply bringing water to Southern California without creating the aqueduct, doing the pumping or replacing pumps, and all of these other ongoing maintenance issues, I just want to look at how much it costs to get here. And I do that, and I then look at how much fossil fuel use we have for maintaining a landscape, very quickly we see that we've exceeded any type of environmental benefit that landscape could achieve. And I think the green industry has this attitude that what we do is doing something beneficial, and this carbon footprint assessment says very quickly we're not. And we just need to be informed about it so we can look at alternatives or consider how we want to address the situation. But I guess I hear very commonly that we're doing wonderful things, and I'm afraid I don't quite see the picture that way.
Sort of along those lines, it's not so much recycled water, but it's how trees use water. And I neglected to bring up one of my samples, and this is my own tree. And I bought it and planted it. So I'm almost embarrassed, but it's an avocado tree. And I have to tell you, I have 4 avocados at home. This one I grew for 7 years, and it just never looked very good. And I kept dumping water on it, and we all know supposedly avocados take a lot of water. But I have 2 avocados that I grew when they were 4 inches tall. And one of them within about 7 years was producing a lot of avocados. One within 4 years, I had over 100 pounds of avocados. So you can grow trees from very small stock, and if the roots develop and get used to your native soils, they don't use as much water as this turkey did when I planted it, and I thought it was okay. But what you can see again is all these roots going round and round and round. I had to wash all the soil off, and obviously when I planted this tree, I didn't wash enough soil off to see, because this is 7 years of growth. So this tree had much smaller roots, and I probably saw what I thought was a healthy root ball, and I'm an arborist, and I still planted the tree. And it took me 7 years to decide that it wasn't worth watering anymore, and I dug it up, I cleaned it off, and now I talk about it. But I really, really firmly believe that we need to plant smaller nursery stock. We need to start smaller with our trees. They're compromised going in the ground, and they forever need more water than if we planted small plants that get used to our soils and used to our rainfall and the roots will grow out, and they will grow deeper when they're younger. If you've ever tried to pull up a little volunteer tree, it may have a root 3 feet long. And that's the tree that says, I want to grow here. You know, we need to plant trees from seed. We need to plant liners. And we're not doing it in an urban setting.
Hi, this is for Bob too. You're on. When you had a slide about the MAWA, and you talked about the new adjustment factor that's 0.45 from 0.7. Can you talk about that a little bit? Maybe explain the change?
So I think most of us know the state had adopted back in 1992 a water conservation ordinance regarding landscapes, and it has a formula for us to use to come up with how much water landscapes should be designed to grow within. And in this regard, in my interpretation, it's simply you take lawn and what it needs, and you take 70% of it, and that's your new budget for your particular climate zone. And with the ongoing drought and Governor's proclamation of conserving water, this ordinance has been revisited and has been recently revised, and taking effect January of next year, landscapes will need to be designed for a budget that's based on 45% of the turfgrass water needs. And incorporated within that is to say no new landscapes in commercial settings should exceed 25% turf grass by square footage. Residential would be adjusted to 50%. So it's also targeted to come down from 70% to 50% of what an all-turf landscape would require.
Bill or Robin, if you could talk a little bit about the drip rings or bubblers in proximity to trees and how we should be planning on having them relocatable, or anything you'd like to add as the tree morphology of the roots close to the trunk versus where the water really needs to be.
Who wants to field that one?
I think it's a loaded question because soils matter and species matter and the size of the root ball. I mean, if it's one of those 36-inch boxes that was augured out into a hole, plant and pray, big tree, no place to go, how much should you water it? Where are the roots? Or did you plant a little seedling that was only this big? And did you did you send it to preschool? So I'm a big advocate that we need to plant trees and give in preschool, and then, yes, then I can answer that question. You need to water really near the root zone when it's young if you plant a small tree, and I'm an advocate that we should be planting not small species, but small specimens. But if it's a big, mature tree, then you've got to ascertain where are the feeder roots. What kind of soil. If you can see them, you have a pretty good idea where the root zone is. And unfortunately, most of the public stands at the trunk with a hose. That's where they think they need to water the tree, if they're watering it at all. Most people, if they have a tree that's not feeling very well, will simply say to you, if someone calls me and says, what's wrong with my tree? Most of the time I say, well, how often do you water it? And they go, water it? So, it's a really tough question, and I don't think there's one size fits all. In these urban settings, let's say parkways, usually there is no irrigation. People are told to bring in buckets. Ultimately, I think it's a hose is just as good as anything. Teach your kids, every week the new kid gets to bucket the tree and, saturate it. And I like your idea is, get the trees acclimated as much as possible to our rainfall because we waste all this water. So as architects, I think there's an obligation to start looking at how we can make every single piece of impervious surface pervious. That will go a long way to solving the plant water issues.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of times too, trees are they seem to be set up for failure. I mean, they're all specced out. They have the perfect staking. They have the aeration piping down. They have the bubblers, and then it gets through the initial inspection, but then it falls on maintenance. And a lot of times you just see where if you go later on, you see dead trees that are all staked perfectly. And you take a look and you kind of wonder why. Well, the bubblers aren't working anymore, or maybe they're not coming on, or eventually they're hoping that they can transition so that the rest of the spray heads that do the shrub beds around it will take care of it. It's that follow-up too that makes it hard to determine what works, because 24-inch box, 36-inch box, I love the concept of putting a berm around the very edge of the box, or the edge of the root zone that they plopped in there, and getting water in there during establishment, then having another area that's watered outside of that area so that the roots can finally make their way out, because there have been a lot of big box trees that have died because they think they can just spray water on the top. But if you don't get that berm around the top of that 24-inch box or something, that's going to dry out real quick. So, yeah, we don't have a great answer, do we? But it's yeah.
Is the big answer. I mean, the trees
Oh, yeah.
are going in the ground, drought stressed, and they never get over it.
Yeah.
So, until we can improve what we're planting, I think it's going to be hard to improve what we're irrigating.
And we've all seen that volunteer come up in our yard tree that outgrows the tree that we grew.
Water is growing along with the
Yeah,
surge
exactly.
of the-
So you are right on that. Yeah. You want to yell it? Okay.
We planted several sizes of plants, and in this regard, 1 gallons to 5 gallons. And some of the stock that came out were really liner in size, were favoring the smaller plant that had a better root system for the foliage, that ratio. And so we actually had a 3-foot auger. We intentionally worked the auger in a way to not create slick sides to the plant pits. These soils are actually in Moreno Valley. They're somewhat alkaline, they're sedimentary, and they're clayey, so that created an issue, that we really needed to be thoughtful about, of not creating a container within a planter that confined roots as they expand. And so there was intentional rupturing and damaging of the side areas so that there could be eventual root penetration. But the key there, again, was hydrating the soil and making sure that field capacity was in the soil around the plant pit, put the plant in, watered it one more time, and that way the water of that installation step didn't get wicked out into the surrounding soil and sort of reducing its volume that would be available for the plant to use.
I don't know about that particular situation. It sounds commendable and interesting, but also probably not applicable to most places, because one of the things that has really changed over time, and I worked in a nursery, is that we're not supposed to amend tree holes. So this goes against what everybody learns about growing tomatoes. Get the best soil you can and compost and do all this stuff. And actually, when you're planting a tree, you should put the native soil back in the hole. You can dig it up, and unless you're going to, plant a tree in the size of an area of this room, and you've basically rototilled everything, which isn't necessarily a good idea either. But it's pretty important not to encourage your tree to stay in the hole you dig. So the only way, and I kind of teach this because I used to teach tree planting classes, but we dug square holes, and a tree root will, even if it's scarred and it's hard, if it goes down in a round hole and the root hits that hard surface, it's going to go round and round even in your soils around here, because I don't know about yours, but mine take a jackhammer sometimes to get through. But if you dig a sort of square hole, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it hits an angle inside the hole, the tree root is much more liable to go into that corner than to actually make a right angle turn and go back around and curl. And that's assuming the roots are not already predetermined like this, which is hopeless. I mean, this is a tree. Avocados should not take that much water, but I'll bet you a ton of people trying to grow them have the same problem I had, unless you plant a very, very small tree that's so small that you just think it's never going to grow and never have fruit, but it will. So don't put stuff in the soil most of the time.
Well, I think that's a very good suggestion. Following up on these projects is very important. Happily, we've been able to, with soil moisture sensors, monitor the moisture of these plants, and we are photographing and recording the growth, and we know that we have a certain number of years in which things favor our technique and strategy of planting, and yet we're mindful that we have not really gone into that 5th, 6th, 10th year of performance to see what may be the long-term implications. As a bit of a counterpoint to Robin's comment, the potting mixes that plants are grown in are remarkably well designed and enriched and situated for phenomenal plant growth. The daily watering of plants is a necessity in nurseries, so hydration levels do not drop. All things that, again, when you get to the larger and larger plant, become a greater and greater issue when you put that into a new location. The soil amending we did, including gypsum and other elements to compensate for the chemistry, the soil chemistry of the Moreno Valley soils, were decisions we made to create a transition and not a replacement to, or an intent to create, again, an environment that's just a little bit larger than a container, and then once those nutrients are absorbed and plant has enlarged, that you're back to where you were with a container plant in a landscape setting. All based on trying to think of ways to achieve a landscape with less dependence on ongoing resources or initial site development, but things that still haven't been completely proven or sorted out in the industry yet.
I just got to go back to your project because it's intriguing. Did you design it to have the stormwater from the road go into that center median to supplement the water during the winter season?
No, we were not able to. We came in at the end of the project. The median was going to be paved over because there was no budget for landscape, and the monies were found, and we're out there saying we can do things like this, and it's time to test some of these things. And we look at the watershed area, and just as a simple example, if you get 8 inches of rain here, and your landscape's 1,000 square feet, and you have your 1,000 square feet of rooftop or pavement adjacent to it, you can get 16 inches of rainfall per year by concentrating that water in your landscape. And now you're really getting to a place where many plants with that amount of winter rain can grow appropriately. When the soil moisture starts to decline, the growth of the plants begins to be reduced, and plants start to transition into that point where without moisture, they're in a pretty stable place. And plants with adaptations to these climate conditions can endure moisture stress for quite a period of time. They just need that good winter recharge. In the case of Moreno Valley, we anticipate what we have is a 2-to-1 ratio of watershed for our plants. And so we're taking 4 to 6 inches and leveraging it into 8 to 12 inches of moisture.
And is the development of a plant palette for that situation, I mean, that has to have been a ton of thought and research behind it, and...
No, all very easy. It's a southwestern plant palette. So you have Palo Verde, you have sweet acacia, Acacia smallii. We have Dazzlerions in there, Hesperallos. We're testing rosemary. We have Cassia or Senna, Philodendea. It's just really a Mountain States nursery plant list, let's say. We have the compact form of a jojoba that Mountain States has introduced, and it's spectacular. None of those plants have died. So it's not limiting in terms of the planting palette. But what we did is we planted everything very carefully spaced, both for observation purposes and knowing we didn't want to have 4 trees grouped together. We wanted sort of dispersed spacing so they had their territory to harvest or obtain the rainfall or water they could grow with. And hey, plants grow in response to how much water they get. And you can have a healthy Acacia smallii after 5 years with half the amount of water the next Acacia smallii gets. And you get that proportional size difference, but they're both very healthy plants. So we expect a landscape that's going to grow more slowly, mature at perhaps less than world-class sizes that only irrigation can afford. Yes, that was a big part of it. Small container plants, good root systems. The Senna Philodendea we got were 3 inches tall. We thought we got gypped from the nursery. Really worried about just not quite enough plant mass and embodied energy in its tissue, and none of those plants have died. They've just exploded.
And the plant available water had to have been an issue. That the clay still has a fairly high holding capacity. So you said you got it up to field capacity before you put them in, so
right.
There must have been quite a bit of water available.
Proportionally and relative to the size of the plants, yes. We did plant under the requirement of the city 6 Swan Hill olive trees, 24-inch box. They're barely surviving. They're not growing. They're not increasing. We're just hopeful that those plants will, develop some roots eventually. And good example of again what we've been talking about, of these larger plants have great need for regular water to enable roots to emerge. Right. No. Michelle.
So it's again for you, Bob, we're maxing out, but your style of planting with the water banking is something we did at Fish and Game Restoration. And I always would marvel people as I switched to the landscape architecture side of like, look, we had Boy Scouts out there on Saturday, but we went through the process of digging holes and honoring. The difference is that in our profession, we're dealt with sites that have been graded and compacted and water trucks have driven over it, and all of the life has been just completely obliterated from that soil structure. And so we found at our firm that we need to add some amendments, not nearly as much as we would for a horticultural plant for natives. So maybe could you touch on what you're seeing on that? I know you straddle the restoration and the native sites where you're just digging holes and everything's intact versus a new construction site and the amendments.
Well, I do find I choose to use some amendments in most situations, trying to find what I consider to be a balance between the growing environment of container plants and the site conditions that we often encounter, which are often soils that are without organic matter or any soil life and are compacted heavily. So we are trying to particularly improve the structure of the soil so that oxygen that Bill's referred to several times is down there along with the moisture. And if there is a soil chemistry issue that can be remedied a bit, we work on that, meaning if it needs to be just a little bit more acidic, or we want to open up the tightness with gypsum, we take those steps. And we're really into mulching as the first step towards providing the organic matter that decomposes and eventually draws the soil life there and becomes the food chain for the biological organisms in the soil, and then breaks down the minerals in the soil and the organics and releases nutrients to the plants. So it becomes a natural system in that regard. But we facilitate that as best we can, as best we understand soil science and chemistry. And it gets pretty complicated.
Feed the soil, not the tree.
Well, that's really it. Yes, we want a living soil system ultimately, because that's going to enable roots to grow and the transfer of nutrients and moisture to the plants. We want it on a level that's just very moderate. We don't want fertilizers that stimulate a flush of growth and then sort of hits the wall and collapses, or water in the same way. You give plants lots of water, overextend their growth, and then cut it off. You need to set things in motion and have a system that keeps building and increasing and growing, and then the landscape follows suit. And it's just a natural model. Amy.
Well, then how do you keep the maintenance people from just blowing it all away? All the leaf litter and all, I mean,
Education. Right.
Jobs.
Good afternoon. So you were saying 24-inch box might be a large size, and there's probably not a one-size-fits-all solution. What size recommendations do you have for trees as you put them in landscapes? I mean, sometimes you can get a 3-inch, but we all need a little bit of instant gratification for other people's houses. Do you have any insight on that?
I don't need a mic. Well, I appreciate that, and because I manage the shade tree program here, we did give away 15-gallon trees. My suspicion is that at least half of those and that was thousands and probably I think it was 32,000 trees we gave away. I think the success rate was like 90% from what I understand. So they were living, but that was maybe after 7 years, and trees usually take 5 to 10 years to die if they're not going to make it. Case in point, my avocado was looking okay, and then it started to just get brown, and no matter how much I threw at it. So this was only a 5-gallon when I planted it. So, you know, is it acceptable? A 36 is acceptable if it is well grown. A 48 could be acceptable. But the problem is that the ability for the institutions we have to actually do what the ANSI standards require, which is to inspect the roots, to make sure that these roots are not coiled. Once you get big box trees, it is not done. I have seen, I mean, I cringe when I see city trees, or for that matter, commercial development trees, or even private trees, and I find that actually the poorer people have the most success, because the people who have a lot of money to burn, they buy the big nursery trees in the big boxes, and they pay thousands of dollars, and then they hire an $8 gardener to dig the hole and they push it in. And on the other hand, the person who can't afford much goes down and buys the 1-gallon plant, and that's gonna, in general, do better. So it's not that the size of the bundle, and I know that Jeremy knows a little bit about this because in most of the country, they ball in burlap trees, okay? We here in Southern California are one of the only places that grows like 99% of our trees in containers. And so the container growing concept all by itself is prone to conflict. And that's the problem that I brought here today, was to show you that this ginkgo was already root bound in the 4-inch liner. Okay, you can see it. You can see, right, if you come up, you're welcome to inspect. You can see the 4-inch liner already compromised. Then it got put into a 5. And I have no doubt that it would have been put into a 15 and bigger, and eventually somebody would pay a lot of money and have a very, very sick tree. And this is not uncommon. So, you know, I understand that you want to have something significant, especially as architects. You know, you can put in a decent sized shrub and perennials and throw in some annuals for color. And you know, when you want to plant a tree, I had a fit when they planted the oak tree at the public library downtown, and they had this majestic oak, it was going to go right in the middle, and they have to bring in an enormous tree. And I thought, if you want it there for 100 years, plant a little one. You know, I mean, it'll be growing and it'll be healthy. So, you know, I hate to say it, but it's not the size of the box, it's the health. It's get in there and look around. And I'm an arborist, I failed. Okay, I planted a bad tree even though I thought I looked at the roots. So my answer is, I don't plant a tree anymore, ever, without taking all the soil off the roots. You heard it here. Because I have run into so many experiences where the roots are so terrible that I want my trees to be water efficient. And I have about 100 fruit trees that I planted, most of them, and my water bill is considerably less than most of my neighbors because I monitor those roots. I plant them in native soil. I do not amend. I try to mulch. And I'm not perfect. I water my hands, by the way. So, you know, it can be done, but don't do that. Don't plant root-bound trees because they're not going to give you the sustainability that you want in the long term.
The problem is I can't put a very small tree in a municipal park and expect it to survive.
Well, I've heard that argument, and it's kind of like the food forest. You know, well, what if people might eat the fruit? You know, I've heard all about the vandalism. But my thought on that is two things. One is, what is the cost of that 36-inch box? Right. Not only to buy the tree, but the labor to plant it. Okay, so you have to have several people to lift the thing. And who's actually taking and separating those roots? Nobody in most cases. Okay, so you're not following ANSI standards, first of all. And then, so you can buy a lot of trees. You can afford to have some problems with the small trees. Okay, you can afford to have maybe 50% loss and still come out way ahead. And I do not actually believe that we would have that much loss. I mean, yes, there'll be some loss, but there's loss with the big trees too. And of course, my idea is that we need to start changing technology. There are great not grates, but like iron barrier type things that you see like in Balboa Park around trees that could be reused. You put them around a small sapling, you plant it, after that tree gets established, you undo it, you bring it over, you put it into the next one, you have those things lined up in municipalities, and that becomes part of the tree. And guess what? You save on staking. No more staking. No more ties, saving money, less carbon footprint, healthier stock, and also that also helps with the pruning, because the smaller the stock, the less likely they are to be topped, the less likely they are to have structural problems, and what little pruning they need can be much easier done. I try to tell people all pruning on trees should mostly be done with a hand pruner. Okay, so that's your answer.
So I think at this point, we're going to thank our presenters once again for all their knowledge and all their time. I also have a few other people that I want to thank that without them, this would not have happened. And I think this has been an incredibly valuable experience for all of us. The other members of the Stewardship Committee put in tremendous amount of time and energy into these events. Michelle Landis, raise your hand, please. Sharon Lowe, right here in the front. Catherine was not able to be here today, but without her, we would not have been as successful. Also, Kevin Ma. Kevin. And the idea man behind this, John Rosinski, right over there. So again, we do have quite a few sponsors that you can speak to out during the networking and reception hour. So please go and thank them for participating and being the sponsors, and learn more about their products. I also want to say that this event is actually part of an overall month-long festival called Arctober Festival. And if you Google it, you'll find a whole calendar of events that are being put on by various organizations in the design community in San Diego. And there's almost an event every day if you're interested, so definitely look into that. You can find links on the San Diego ASLA website to the Arctober Festival page as well. And with that, I think it's time to open up the bar, and everyone.
We're going to, the stewardship posts information and links.
That was my first bullet that I didn't say. Okay, so just so you know, all of you that were scribbling down all the information that our presenters were writing, all the slides for the presentation will be available on the Stewardship Committee website, as well as the video. Sebastian, right over there in the corner, has been videotaping this whole thing. So that might take a little bit to get up, but that will eventually be on the website as well. All right.